Our story begins at night, in a place that seems to have been abandoned, and a man was tied to the ceiling by a rope, and several people were watching him as if they were having fun with it. And underneath that boy who was tied up, there were a lot of zombies. Just then, a very attractive woman calls out the boy's name, which is Jong Zioyong. She says that all his friends are dead, and she wonders if life has no meaning for him now. And the young man, remembering all the people, is very angry, thinking that it's all his fault and that he caused it for his friends. And then he calls the woman cursed, saying that she deserves to die a miserable death. And at this, it seems that the woman is quite happy, commenting that it looks like he's angry with her again, and she hugs a man's arm, and this man says that they're going to slowly oppress him to satisfy his anger. But first, that man thinks they need to be grateful for the supplies, as they can live comfortably for a few more months now, and at that, he presses a button on a control that was in his hand. He wakes up and goes down, knocking the boy into the place where the zombies were. And when the zombies see the boy in there, they start charging towards him ferociously, and they start biting the boy with all their might, and soon blood is coming out of the boy's mouth. And at that, the boy thought, as if he were talking to those two damned people, thinking of Qi Jing and Lai Shuxing, that if he had another chance to live again, he would make them both pay for what they had done. Then, suddenly, he wakes up very frightened, with someone shouting his name, asking Zhang Zioyong what he's thinking. And then the woman asks the young man why he hasn't put her name on the deed of the house, and she asks him if he really loves her. And the young man at that moment didn't understand a thing. He thinks, and at the same time wonders what is going on. He begins to look to one side and to the other. He wonders at the same time if it could be that he has returned to before the apocalypse began, and in his past life he had been tricked by Qi Jing, who not only stole the inheritance his parents had left him, but also ended up letting him become homeless, and he was disgusted just remembering it. Later, a global catastrophe occurred, turning most humans into zombies and plunging the world into chaos. With the help of friends he made while wandering, he built a safe zone and managed to survive the apocalypse. But he really couldn't have imagined that lying Qi Jing would pretend to be a desperate person seeking refuge and win his sympathy. But in reality, she had been sent by the enemy to destroy everyone. And then he hears Qi Jing saying that the bride price is 400,000 yuan, not a penny less, and he doesn't say a word at that moment. And Qi Jing asks if Zhang Zioyong was listening to her, and all the protagonist thought was that she was just an ordinary woman. And then, looking at her, he realizes something and thinks that he couldn't be impulsive now. And Qi Jing even tells him that she was giving him a week, and if he still hasn't got it, but the protagonist interrupts her. He pushes her out of the house, saying it's all right and he's understood, and tells her to leave, and she doesn't understand anything, holding her bag. She looks back, and the protagonist slams the door with all his might. She wonders at the same time what is going on, and when did Zhang Zioyong become so assertive, and she wonders if he wasn't her lackey. And then the protagonist, still at the door, holding the handle, takes a brief look at the house. He looks at his digital watch. It shows the time and day on which he finds himself. It was the 5th day of the 7th month of 2034, and the protagonist thinks that there is only 1 month left, and he must immediately start preparing for the apocalypse, until he sees something that catches his eye, and he becomes doubtful. The system panel appears, showing the task system, saying that the apocalypse system is now active. The system mission had been released, and Zhang Zioyong should complete it as soon as possible. The name of the mission was Preparation of the Apocalypse. The requirements of the mission were to own a piece of land, which had not yet been made, and to prepare the forecasts for a year. The reward of the mission was 10 points, and these points can be exchanged for rewards in the system store. And the protagonist is surprised and thinks that he was looking at the system, and he wonders how the question of mission reward points worked. He wanted to know what these points could be used for. He enters the system store, and there he sees the physical enhancement potion, which costs 2 points. He also sees an item called the Apocalypse Farmer's Supply Box, which costs 2 points, and the protagonist's supply box, which costs 10 points, and to upgrade the store, you also have to spend points, consuming 2 points per upgrade. The protagonist is surprised to see this, and his mouth drops open. He thinks he's almost forgotten. In his previous life, he was saving every penny to raise the money for Qi Jing's wedding, which left him just dust, completely tired. It really took a lot out of him. Then he starts walking. He walks over to the table and picks up his smartphone. He opens the food app and thinks that in a month, zombies will be everywhere, and as long as there is still good food, he should eat well. Then it was evening, and the protagonist, with several dishes on his table, asks himself yes. Then it will be the legendary and expensive Michelin 3-star restaurant, and he tells himself that he really wanted to taste a 300 yuan pork roast, and he eats his meal quite calmly after putting a piece of pork in his mouth. He tastes it and is very happy, saying that it is really delicious. He is happy to the point of turning into a Super Saiyan, suddenly tearing his shirt off as if it were nothing. And soon, he starts eating very quickly, as if he were Son Goku. Then a notification pops up on his smartphone, drawing his attention. When he picked up his smartphone, he saw that it was called Wen Shuya, a friend of Qi Jing's, and he thought that the manipulative woman had been crying to her little friend. And after he answers the phone, Wen Shuya doesn't even say goodnight, asking Zhang Xiaoyong what's on his mind, and how he could treat Qi Jing like that. And she goes on to say that she just wanted him to prove his love for her, and if he can't even give her his property, he can't say he loves her. And she speaks so loudly that it irritates the poor protagonist's ear. She also comments that Qi Jing was only testing him a little, and he still failed, and if he brought the deed to the house and 1,000,000 yuan in cash to her to apologize, maybe she would even help persuade Qi Jing, and if not, she hopes they will split up. And the protagonist quickly raises his voice, asking Wen Shuya who she thinks she is, and he asks if she thinks she can test him, and tells her to get out. The boy had just revived, and he was out of patience, and when Wen Shuya was about to say more, he simply hung up on her, and at that moment, he leaned back on the sofa, looking for a little peace in that moment, and he wonders about the system panel, saying that he needed to own a piece of land. He thinks he will build the strongest fortress in the land, not only defensible, but also close to a water source and forest. Then the protagonist was walking. It was morning. Just then, a girl with a smile on her face said hello to him, asking if he was there to rent or buy a house. And the protagonist replies that he is neither, and he was there to stop, until he is interrupted by a young man calling out to the woman. The man told the woman, whose name was Xiao Ning, that he was going to help move the boxes at the bottom, as they had received a lot of toilet paper today, and that the man was a real estate sales manager, whose name was Zhu. So the woman told the manager, Zhu, that she had a client to see, and then Zhu simply raised his voice to her, grabbed her shoulder, and asked her if she had forgotten what he had taught her. He thought it made no sense at all, and told her to go and work in the back, and Xiao Ning didn't understand a thing at that moment. And the manager Zhu comments that the protagonist is a broke loser with cheap clothes. He probably can't even afford a toilet, and he wonders what kind of customer that would be. And the protagonist asks the manager, Zhu, what he had just said, and also asks if he was looking down on people. And soon, Zhu looks at him with a different look, and then he doesn't take it back. He tells the protagonist that he's the kind of person who looks down on dogs like him. He goes on to say that if the protagonist manages to buy a toilet, he'll do a live broadcast of himself eating poop. And the protagonist doesn't say a word at that point. And after a moment, the protagonist says that everything is fine, and since manager Zhu says that, he will definitely find something fresh for him later, speaking with an ironic tone to the boy. And then he tells Xiao Ning that he's not there to rent or sell today, and pulls out his American Express. He said he was there to buy a plot of land, showing the card to both of them, and everyone is shocked at that moment, asking what he meant when he said he wanted to buy a plot of land, and asks if he knows how much it costs. And the other boy next to him says it's the first time he's seen someone buy a plot of land, and everyone thinks he's a real tycoon. And Xiao Ning, having heard him say that, says that it's all right, calling the protagonist sir. She asks him to accompany her, saying that she would give him a detailed introduction. And the manager Zhu, without putting any faith in it, comments that anyone can brag, but when the time comes to pay, he doesn't believe that the protagonist can really afford it. And then Xiaoning shows the protagonist that these are the plots of land that their company currently owns, and he can have a look while she presents them to him. And the protagonist tells her that it's not necessary, and asks her to let him state his demands so that she can see if there's anything of interest to him, and she asks him to please continue. And he says that he wants a plot of land that is close to mountains and water, preferably a source of running water, convenient transportation, and it would be better if there was a factory or a large house on it. And Xiaoning says that she was thinking about something related to what he just said. And then Manager Zhu arrives, and he asks if there isn't a plot in the Eastern District that meets his requirements. And the girl doesn't understand, asking what he means by the district or the east, and asks if he's talking about the plot in the town of Tea Leaf, and she says that's not possible. The buildings there are all unfinished factories, and it hasn't been sorted out yet, and he simply couldn't sell it to the client. And Manager Zhu, still annoyed and rather jealous, asks Xiaoning what they would sell, saying that the protagonist is just listing bizarre demands, and he's not there to buy land, but just to cause trouble. And the protagonist asks if the plot in the Eastern District really does meet all his requirements, and Xiaoning replies that it does. But there's a catch. She says that the factories are unfinished and the project leader has fled, and the protagonist thinks that the location is good and meets all his requirements, and he should fence it off with barbed wire, and it would be easy to defend and difficult to attack. The unfinished factories can save him a lot of cost and time. Then he says he's going to take the lot, and he asks if they could sign the contract and pay now, and the saleswoman quickly takes the paper from his hand and says yes, until she realizes what he's just said, and she goes wide-eyed and open-mouthed. And she asks the protagonist if he's really going to buy this plot of land with unfinished factories, and the protagonist answers her, saying yes, and she should hurry up so he can sign a contract and make the payment. And with an ironic tone, he says that there's someone waiting to eat something fresher later, making Manager Zhu very angry. And when the manager saw the paperwork, he said it wasn't possible. He kept going on and on about the 30,000. He was shocked about the 30,000 deposit, and he wondered if anyone was really willing to spend millions on a piece of land with unfinished factories, because he really couldn't believe it. And then Zhong Xiaoyang grabs the man's shoulder and tells Manager Zhu that he's made the payment, and now it's the manager's turn. And if he eats with gusto, the protagonist will send him a rocket afterwards. And at that moment, everyone started making fun of the manager, calling him a fatty, and saying that they had started the live broadcast for him and he should hurry up. And the other guy said that his stomach wasn't very good, and thanks to that, he could offer him something fresh. And the other guy said that he had eaten a lobster and was going to give the fatty something fresh. As he had made a promise, he would have to pay. After all, a promise is a debt. And then the protagonist thinks about the task system. As he walks, he thinks that he has spent all his wedding money buying land, and now he has to figure out how to get money and stock up on supplies. And then, as he's walking, a man sees him and thinks, and at the same time wonders if that isn't Zhong Xiaoyang, and wonders what he's doing there, until the man sees something that leaves him completely stunned. It was Manager Zhu on the ground, asking for help and saying that he didn't want to eat poop, and the men were holding him down and offering him poop. And the man, seeing that, yells at those other guys, asking what they're doing. And then the scene switches to Qi Jing, and she's painting her nails, blowing on one of them to make it dry faster, until her smartphone starts ringing. And she quickly picks up her smartphone and answers. It's Lai Shuoxing, and she calls him a believer, and also comments that it seems he still remembers people. But Lai Shuoxing cuts through the small talk, asking Qi Jing if she knew that Zhong Xiaoyang came to the real estate company to buy land today. She was completely perplexed when she heard this, asking what he meant, saying that the protagonist had bought land, and she wanted to know where he had gotten the money from. She was outraged and slammed her hand on the table, and Lai Shuoxing said it was a deposit of 30,000, and he thought it was the wedding money he had saved. and Jing asks what that was he just said, and says that the protagonist is a bastard, and he's a scoundrel because he dared to use her money. And Lai tells her not to get angry, and to go and find Zhang Zioyong and ask what's going on. And she asks Lai what she was going to ask. She says that the scoundrel is rebelling, and she doesn't understand how he dares to use her money, and she has to expose him online today. And the scene switches to the protagonist, who was sitting on his sofa, and he kept thinking that buying supplies and building a base would require a lot of money, and he wondered where he was going to get that money. Then, suddenly, he hears a knock on the door, and he wonders what's going on. And when he opens the door, he sees Jing and her friend, and he asks them both what they're doing there, and Jing, completely disgusted, asks the protagonist what's on his mind, and how dare he spend her money, and the protagonist doesn't understand, asking what she's talking about. And she answers him, saying that he shouldn't think that she doesn't know that he had used the wedding money to buy a plot of land, and she's warning him, the wedding money is hers. And since he had bought a plot of land, it was hers, and the protagonist says that Jing must be crazy, and then he tells the girl to listen well. He says he has money, but he won't let her spend a single penny of it, slamming the packet of money into her collarbone, and also saying that she shouldn't think he doesn't know about her and Lai Shuxing. And at that moment, after he had said that, Jing thought, and at the same time wondered how he knew about her and Lai Shuxing. And then the girl's friend simply pokes her, saying that the two of them should calm down. She says that it's all a misunderstanding between couples, and the protagonist asks her friend what she meant by misunderstanding, because for him, there is no misunderstanding, and besides, she and he are no longer a couple. She and Lai Shuxing's old man are the real ones. And he slams the door in Jing's face with all his might, telling her to get out of there because she's annoying him just by being there. And Jing thinks that's impossible. She thinks, and at the same time wonders, how could he know? Because he's always been very discreet every time he's checked into a hotel. As they were going down the elevator, her friend asked Jing how it was such a big deal, and she hadn't even told her before. And she asked Jing if she had really gotten involved with that middle-aged man, and Jing, a little miffed, answered her friend, saying that they had only checked into a hotel a few times. And her friend says that this has become a lose-lose situation, and they should go back and think of a plan. And Jing agrees with her friend, saying that this is all they can do now. Just then, the elevator door opens, and the friend of the protagonist's ex thinks that since she had messed things up with Zhang Zioyong, she would take over from there, and with a smile on her face, she thinks that they are good sisters after all. And then the protagonist was at the site of the land, and he says that this is the factory he wants to renovate, and he asks the construction guy how long it will take to complete. And the guy on the construction site replied, "Here we are reinforcing the walls, building guard towers, installing Texas barbed wire, increasing the number of blast-proof steel doors, and reinforcing the bulletproof glass, etc." He was impressed by the amount of things, and that was the guy in charge of the Palu construction company. And then he asks the protagonist what kind of force he has offended, and the protagonist answers him, saying that he shouldn't ask too much, because knowing too much won't do him any good, and he asks him to just tell him when he can finish it in a month, and how much it will cost. And the foreman Lai answers the protagonist, and the protagonist asks him to cut the small talk, and says that if he doesn't do it, there are many people who will. And foreman Lai, calling the protagonist boss, says that the lives of the palace are also lives, and the protagonist asks him if that foreman has a conscience. And then Lai, the foreman, tells his boss that it's not like that, and that he means it's going to cost more, and he says it with a smile on his face, as if to break the ice. And the protagonist, who was not very chatty, told him to name a price. And the foreman commented that if they had to finish in a month, then he would have to make the palace work intensively. And he asked the protagonist what he thought of paying a trifle of at least 20 million. And the protagonist asks if he's really saying that the price is 20 million. And the foreman replies, saying yes, and also says that he should only give him a deposit of 5 million first, only then can they start work. And the protagonist says that everything is fine, and he's going to transfer the money in a week's time, and they should start work now. And the foreman gets a bit apprehensive at that moment, and it was visible on his face. And the protagonist asks the foreman not to worry, because he won't run away without paying, and if he didn't pay, the land was the foreman's. and the foreman tells the protagonist that everything is fine then. And then, while he was negotiating, his ex's friend arrives, saying hello, with a smile on her face, and the protagonist doesn't understand anything at that moment, and she asks the protagonist what he's doing there and hugs his arm. And at that moment, the protagonist thinks that she's just an ordinary woman. She had persuaded Qi Jing to cheat him and get his family's property, and in this life, he was going to make her pay double, so he asks her what she's doing there, but she doesn't answer. She turns a deaf ear, and with a smile on her face, she asks if that's the plot of land he'd bought, and she thinks it's a beautiful setting. She also asks if he's planning to build a villa there, and the protagonist quickly pulls his arm out of hers, saying that what he builds or fails to build is none of her business. And at that moment, she thinks, and at the same time wonders what's going on, because that loser Zhang Xiaoyang is simply acting strangely today, and normally, just touching his hand would make him blush and his heart race. And today she even deliberately showed off a bit, and she wonders if he didn't have any reaction to that, which makes her deeply angry. And then, as the protagonist sees the work beginning, he says that it's not right and says that the gate needs to be expanded, and the girl tries to get his attention, but he doesn't give a damn, and she thinks that this can't happen at all. She can't miss this golden opportunity, since Qi Jing had fallen out with him. If she can push Qi Jing out of the game, all that land will be hers. Then the protagonist was in his house, and he thinks that pawning that house to the bank would only net him 3 million yuan. That's not enough to cover the first phase of the construction courses, and he needs to find a way to get more money, until he stops to think about it, and he thinks that the apocalypse is imminent anyway, which means that even if he sells houses to several people, it simply won't matter, and he thinks he should do it. Then someone starts knocking on his door, asking him to open it, and the protagonist gets very angry, thinking it's that old man again. The downstairs neighbor, the gentleman, has some money, and he has bought the first and second floors and wants to buy the third floor as well, which belongs to the protagonist. And at that moment, the protagonist was going to open the door. However, the protagonist had originally intended to use that house as his home after getting married, so he had refused to sell it. Since then, this old man had been causing problems, painting his door, piling up the garbage, putting on funeral wreaths, and locking the lock. He had used all sorts of dirty tricks, and when he opened the door, the old man was simply talking quite loudly, asking the young protagonist if he had gone clubbing again last night. And the protagonist, visibly irritated, says that he's had enough, and he said that he went to bed before 10 last night, and he wasn't in any nightclub. And the old man replies that he doesn't care, because he heard clearly, and the protagonist asks the old man to stop doing this, because he's just keeping an eye on his house, and he's already getting fed up with it. And he says that he's going to sell this house to the old man, because he wants peace above all else. And the old man, having heard the protagonist say this, is completely confused at that moment, and stammering, he asks the protagonist if he's serious. And the protagonist answers him, saying yes, but on one condition, and the old man asks what that condition is. And the protagonist says that he's not going to hand over the house until 6 months from now, so he needs to live there for another 6 months. And before that, he needs to transfer 5 million yuan to him, all at once, so that he can pay off the mortgage on his new house. And the old man is a bit reluctant at that point, and the protagonist tells the old man that if he doesn't agree, then he can forget the deal, already preparing to slam the door in the old man's face. The old man quickly tells the protagonist that this is great, but there's a catch. They need to sign a contract to prevent the protagonist from backing out of the sale, and the protagonist says that the contract won't be a problem and asks the old man not to worry about it. And at the same time, the protagonist thinks that that damned old man could wait and die in his house. And then he's fiddling with his smartphone, thinking that when Mr. Lie's 5 million yuan is transferred, plus the 3 million yuan loan, he'll have 8 million yuan. And he thinks that first, he has to complete the system task and claim the reward, so he opens the system panel and presses claim. Then it was morning, and the sky was very clear and beautiful, and the protagonist was in a supermarket. The system showed that he should prepare prepare supplements for a whole year, and out of 365, he had 369, and he was moving his shopping trolley as fast as he could, and people seeing him like that wonder if that guy is mentally stable, and the woman next to that man says that they should be quick and stay away from him, treating the protagonist as if he were a maniac in the park. Then, suddenly, the protagonist crashes one cart into another. He had already collected 8 shopping trolleys, and everyone couldn't understand why he was buying so many things. And the boy says that the protagonist is another fool who believes in doomsday rumors, and he starts laughing at that, until the system panel showed that the disaster preparedness mission had been completed, and he had earned 10 points from the system, and his current points were 10. And the protagonist, seeing this and analyzing the point store, snaps, saying that in the apocalypse, improving tributes is important, but this protagonist's supply box is exactly 10 points, and he thinks he shouldn't hesitate. He should seize the first opportunity and go all out. He should choose the protagonist's supply box, and so he chooses that. And the system panel notifies the protagonist, saying that the exchange was successful and 10 points were deducted, and his current points were 0, and the protagonist opens that mysterious box, and you get an item called a level 1 space ring, and the ring's characteristics are that it contains 500 cubic meters of space and time inside space. Then he sees the appearance of the ring, which is purple, and when the protagonist saw that, he smiled, thinking that he already knew that the first draw is always golden, and that ring was shining near his hands, and he thinks and wonders at the same time about the fact that time stands still inside the space, and if that means that even if he stores fresh produce, it won't spoil, and he thinks that's great. And then the system panel shows the new task, which is called 10 years of sustainability, and it showed 0 out of 10 years of supplies, and the reward points are 20, until someone simply shouts who. And again, he shouts out who is causing trouble, with 2 guards by his side, and seeing the protagonist, he asks if it's him, saying his name, and the protagonist wonders if he is Yangtao, and he thinks that Yangtao was his high school classmate, and he was a lackey following the school bully. Zhang Shengzhe, he's a guy who always bullies the weak and is afraid of the strong, and he remembers well what it was like at school, with Yangtao with 2 bullies by his side, telling the protagonist that he should pay last week's protection fee, which costs 10 yuan, and he should pay it quickly, and the protagonist would tell him to fuck off, saying that if he wanted to, he should send Zhang Shengzhe to pick him up himself, and the protagonist thinks that they had a lot of conflict at school, and he didn't expect to find him there today. At this, Yangtao asks Zhang Zhaoyong what he's doing over there, and says that he should put these things back where they belong, or he'll be rude to him, and the protagonist replies to Yangtao, saying that he keeps bullying the weak, and he's only there to buy items, and he asks if that's how he treats his customers. And Yangtao asks what he means by buying, and says that he should pay for those items right now, or he shouldn't blame them for being strict. And then, an hour later, the coupon was huge, and several women working on the plane, just to serve the protagonist. At this, Yangtao asked an employee how much she had given in total, and she said that the total was 56,883 yuan. Yangtao quickly takes out a card machine and extends his arm to the protagonist, telling him that he should pay now. And the protagonist, at that moment, swipes his card with all his fury, and the machine beeps, showing that the transaction was successful, and Yangtao can't believe it. And then, quickly, he turns away with his 2 guards by his side, saying that they were going now. He had at least thanked the protagonist for the purchase, and the protagonist shouts, asking Yangtao to wait a second, and Yangtao turns and asks the protagonist what he wants, and the protagonist said that he had been very rude just now, and he thinks he needs to apologize, otherwise he would return all those products. And Yangtao begins to stutter, with a little anger showing in his voice. He says that the protagonist is going too far, and he's just there to look for trouble, and the other customers start commenting, saying that they had snubbed the protagonist and were rude to him now, and he's just asking them to apologize, and they ask if that wasn't such a difficult thing to do, and the other person says that's exactly it. Yangtao should apologize, and if he didn't apologize, they wouldn't let it go. And the other guy with the smartphone in hand says that TikTok is recording, and Yongtao should apologize now or they'd make it famous. And the protagonist continues, telling Yongtao to apologize, and if they're sincere enough, he'll buy 10 times as much. And Yongtao, after the protagonist has said this, begins to stutter, asking if the protagonist is serious. And the protagonist, with a smile on his face, says that he is serious and asks him to bring the machine so that he can show the balance. And he swipes his card. And Yongtao practically freaks out, seeing that there were 700,000 in the balance. And the protagonist again tells Yongtao to apologize, and if he apologized he would keep buying, and if he was lying, Yongtao could call him a bastard. And Yongtao doesn't say a word at that point, until, stammering, he simply bows to the protagonist, apologizing to him. And the protagonist tells Yongtao to remember that he shouldn't be so reckless in the future, and leaves the space for the others. And he asks if Yongtao has understood the message. And then the protagonist turns away, and Yongtao, with a smile on his face, trying to treat him well, asks the protagonist why he's buying so many things, and the protagonist replies that it's none of his business and he's planning something important. And Yongtao asks what he means by something important, and he goes on to say that the things in the supermarket warehouse won't be enough and he'll need to find a wholesaler. And the protagonist tells Yongtao that since he works in the supermarket, he should know some wholesalers, and asks if he's not sure about that. And Yongtao replies that he clearly is, and asks if he remembers Zhang Shengzhe, and says that he's in the wholesale business now. He quickly takes out his smartphone and calls Sheng Zhen, telling him that he has found a great client for him, and the protagonist just listens. He thinks that Yongtao is still working for Zhang Shengzhe, and he wonders how much illegal income the two of them must pocket from this supermarket. And then he was outside with Yongtao until a car approaches them both, scaring Yongtao. And the protagonist thinks that, driving so arrogantly, he must never have been cheated before. Just then Zhang Sheng steps out of the car smoking a cigarette, and then he asks Yongtao if that's the big client he mentioned, and Yongtao tells Zhang that that's Zhang Zioyong and asks if he remembers him. And Zhang asks who it is, and again Yongtao says it's Zhang Zioyong, their high school classmate. And while puffing on his cigarette, Zhang said that now he was remembering, and then he throws the smoke in the protagonist's face, and he says that Zhang Zioyong was the guy with a bit of courage. And then he grabs the protagonist's sweatshirt string and asks if he's wearing a fake designer brand, and he despises people like him who pretend to be rich when they're not. And the protagonist asks what he means by a designer brand, because he doesn't really know, and he just bought it at a random stall. And then Zhang gets in Yongtao's face quite aggressively, asking if this is the big client he was talking about, and he gets quite angry, saying that Yongtao is wasting his time. And Yongtao insists, telling Zhang Shengzhe that he really is a great client, but he just gets kicked by Zhang, who says that he's not a great client, and he's been in this business for so many years that he can tell who's rich and who's not with just one look. And the protagonist tells Zhang that it seems his timing really isn't working, because he can't even give you an illiterate who looks down on people. And Zhang Shengzhe quickly becomes more irritated than he already was, asking the protagonist what he just said and grabbing the collar of his sweatshirt. And the protagonist continues, saying that he had said that Zhang Shengzhe looks down on people. And Zhang asks the protagonist how he dares to call him illiterate, and the protagonist doesn't understand, asking if saying that Zhang Shengzhe looks down on people is okay. And Yongtao, trying to appease the situation, with a smile on his face, asks the protagonist not to poke at Zhang Sheng's weak point, and says that he really is illiterate, so he hates being called that. And then Zhang tells Yongtao that he should go and pick up a coconut, and if he can't speak properly, he should shut up. And then he asks the protagonist if he's a big customer, and tells him that if he doesn't take a load of merchandise from him today, neither of them will be able to stand up. And the protagonist talks sternly to Zhang Shengzhe, telling him to stop tugging at his collar and showing him his bill, and he was holding his smartphone. And Zhang Shengzhe, seeing that, asks if it would be 1,000,000 on the spot, and also asks if the protagonist is serious. And the protagonist says it's no joke, and asks why he would be there after all. That's the warehouse, and he's buying 5 million in goods. And he wanted to load the truck quickly, and he would give the other 4 million left when the goods are ready. And Zhang Sheng asks the protagonist what kind of goods he wants. And the protagonist says that he wants rice oil, salt, snacks, drinks, anything edible or drinkable. He wants everything. And Zhang Sheng tells the protagonist to follow him, and at the same time he thinks he can't believe how lucky he is, because he's just picked up a batch of almost expired food and there's a hustler there to take it all. Then he shows the protagonist all the merchandise, telling him that if he took the whole lot, he would give him a 10% discount on the original wholesale price, and he asks what the protagonist thinks of that. And the protagonist answers Zhang, saying that it depends on the quality of the goods. And he picks up a package and looks at it for a while. He comments that except for the outermost layer, everything inside is almost expired, and he says that Zhang Sheng is very clever. And Zhang Sheng, disgruntled, thinks that he didn't expect that guy to understand the business. So he tells him that if he takes all those almost expired goods, he'll give him a 50% discount, and he asks what the protagonist thinks of that. And the protagonist replies to Zhang, saying that he doesn't need it, and he's using that 5 million to buy the best quality goods, and Zhang doesn't say anything at that point. And he says that as far as these almost expired goods were concerned, he had other plans, and Zhang asks what those plans were. And the protagonist says that, as he said, with a 50% discount, he'll take all the goods that are almost past their sell-by date. But there's a catch. He says the payment will be made in a month's time. And Zhang Sheng asks if he's serious, and also asks if the goods expire and he doesn't pay, and the protagonist says that he shouldn't worry because he was going to mortgage his house for Zhang, and the blood asks if he knows that they're almost due and still wants to. He asks if the protagonist could tell him what his channel is. The protagonist asks what he means by the channel. He says that there is no channel, because he is the channel. And then the protagonist grabs Zhang Sheng's shoulder and comments that not only is food almost expired, even if it is expired, it will be worth a fortune in a few days. And Zhang hears him say it and asks the protagonist what he means. And the protagonist told him to stop asking and just deliver the goods, and he said he would send the address later. And at that moment, someone calls the protagonist and asks if it's Zhang, and the protagonist asks who it is. And the person asks if he's sure he's selling his house. And then the protagonist tells the two men that he was doing business, that he has something else to do, and they should take care of the food for him. And after the protagonist leaves, Yang Tao asks Zhang if he hadn't cheated him. And Zhang says that the boy's family is ordinary, so he wanted to understand how he was doing so well. Then the old man said that there was a deposit of 400,000, and he said that he could accept the condition that he vacate the house in 3 months, and asked them to sign the contract now. And the protagonist thinks that that gentleman hasn't even inspected the house properly and is already anxious to pay the deposit and sign the contract. And at the same time he wonders how desperate he is, and he asks the old man why he's in such a hurry. And the old man sighs, saying with honesty that his granddaughter needs to change schools and they urgently need this house for their residence. And he has been looking for this area, and only his house is for sale. And he asks the protagonist to please not give up. And the protagonist tells the old man that he's very honest, revealing everything at once, and he asks if the old man isn't afraid that he'll raise the price. When the old man hears him say this, he goes wide-eyed, says that buying the house cost his entire family savings, and asks the protagonist not to do it. My protagonist tells him not to worry because he won't give up. And then they start signing the contract. And the old man, very anxious, says that this is very good. And then he bows, telling the protagonist that he'll let him get back to his business and won't bother him anymore. And the protagonist just tells the old man to take care of himself. At the same time, the protagonist thinks that by being kind and honest, he and his granddaughter probably won't survive a month in the coming apocalypse. Until, when the old man was turning his back on the protagonist asked him to wait a moment, and the old man asked what was wrong. And the protagonist asks him to give him the address of where he is living now. Then the scene changes completely. The protagonist is looking at the construction, and the man in charge, Lai, tells Zhang Xiaoyang about the second part of the funds, and the protagonist simply cuts off the conversation, saying that he would transfer it to him soon and asks how the construction is going. And the foreman Lai says that it's about 70 to 80% finished, and he asks him to look at the walls. The doors and everything is absolutely safe and reliable, and the protagonist asks about the warehouse, and the foreman points upwards, saying that the warehouse is an unfinished factory building, and it's already clean and ready for use, and the protagonist thinks that's very good. And at that moment, the protagonist picks up his smartphone and calls Zhang, asking him to bring the products. Then the protagonist hires some people who keep telling each other to be careful, and they say that the boss is generous because he's paying 2,000 to each person for this kind of work, and they're surprised because it really looks like a shelter. And one of them says that rich people actually value their lives. The protagonist says that fresh produce such as fruit, vegetables, and other perishable items should be stored separately. He asks them not to mix everything up, and the contractor with a smile on his face says he understands, calling the protagonist his boss and asking him not to worry. And then, after those men had finished their work, they left the place, and the protagonist gets to see all that great stock he had, and he thinks that everything is finally done. And the system panel shows that the task 10 years ago of supplies had been completed, and the protagonist receives another 20 system points, and the current points he has are now 20. And the protagonist opens the system store, and he's surprised because there's a new box in the system store, and at the moment, the store had available the physical augmentation portion, which cost 20 points, the supply box called the Apocalypse Farmer, which costs 2 points, and the supply box called the Awakening Skill, which is worth 10 points, and the protagonist thinks he's very lucky to gain skills before the apocalypse begins. And then he makes a transaction, buying the Awakening Skill box, spending 10 points, and then he received a skill called the Mind's Eye, and it was at level 1, and the characteristics were that he could detect if the other party has hostility. The protagonist wonders what the system panel meant by hostility detector, and he starts to laugh, as he thinks this is one of the most useful skills at the start of the apocalypse, until the system panel shows a new task called Arm to the Teeth, and the requirements of the task is to arm yourself, and he was at 0%, and the reward for the task would be 10 points plus a random reward. And when the protagonist sees that, he gets a Machiavellian smile on his face. He tells himself that this is exactly what he had in mind. Then the scene shifts to the black market, and it was night. There were several people on the street, many of them checking out the products, and the protagonist was walking there, and a boy asked him if it was real or fake, and the other replied that only a novice would ask such a question, and the price should tell him if it was real or fake. And the other person was surprised by what he was seeing, and another asked him to be quiet because he had just dug him up from the grave yesterday, and the other asked about Qin Shi Huang's childhood helmet. The protagonist stared in the corner while the boy told them to do it cheaper, asking to do it for 300 yuan, and the other asked who bargained like that. And then the protagonist sees an acquaintance, asking the guy if he was selling the fake jade bracelet for 2,000, and it's obviously fake. He asks the guy to sell it to him for 300, and he'll still make a profit, and he asks if the guy will sell it or not, because otherwise he's leaving, and the salesman says it's okay, and asks him not to shout, and he'll sell it to him. And the protagonist thinks at the same time that he wonders why Lai Shuoxing is buying fake jade bracelets at the ghost market, and thinks about Qi Jing. He thinks that everyone has really fallen for the scam. Then the protagonist sees a vendor selling swords. He sees it and gets a smile on his face, thinking that he has finally found it. And then he picks up a sharpener to see and asks the salesman if he has anything strong there. And the salesman explains to the protagonist that it's a knife sharpener, and if he wants something strong, he should buy it and sharpen it himself, or he can get a truncheon if that's not enough. And the protagonist answers the salesman, saying that he needs something stronger. And the salesman asks what the protagonist means, and wonders if he's there to cause trouble. Suddenly, the seller received a notification on his smartphone that 200,000 yuan had been transferred to his account, leaving him in a state of alert at that moment. And the protagonist tells him not to get excited, and he is serious about the purchase, showing that it was he who had made that transaction using the seller's QR code. Just then, the vendor calls Xiaoxiang, asking him to come and watch the stall. And then he extends his arm to the protagonist, whispering. He tells the protagonist that talking outside is inconvenient and asks the protagonist to accompany him. The protagonist then enters that door with a salesman, and the salesman shows the protagonist that he has those homemade guns there, enough to kill a chicken or two for 2,000 yuan, and the ammunition is cheap, just gunpowder and steel balls, and he asks what the protagonist thinks of it. And the protagonist says it's not good enough, and the salesman is speechless at that moment. And then he asks the protagonist what he thinks of a replica revolver. Its performance is almost the same as a service weapon, and it costs 5,000 yuan and fires 9mm bullets. He says that each bullet costs 5 yuan if the protagonist buys it with him, and asks what the protagonist thinks of that. And the protagonist responds to the salesman, saying that it is acceptable, but he had paid 200,000 in advance, and says that this kind of thing is not very appropriate, and asks if he doesn't think so. And the salesman doesn't understand, asking what he means by paying in advance. And the protagonist says that 10% was paid in advance, and he's buying 2 million in weapons. And the salesman is a little shocked, asking the protagonist what he does for a living, and also asking why he has come to him for such a large order. And the protagonist replies that he doesn't normally take care of such trivial matters. His subordinates do that, but there have been some changes recently, and he asks the salesman not to ask too many questions, and just tell him whether he can handle it or not. And the salesman asks the protagonist to wait a moment. And then the salesman goes to the door and locks it with the key. He goes to the window and closes the curtain, and he told the protagonist that he had found the right person. He was the salesman the protagonist needed. He tells the protagonist, whispering, that he can handle it, and he asks me to write a list, and he will give the address, and the protagonist should go there midnight the day after tomorrow to complete the transaction. And he also asks the protagonist to remember to bring cash. He then opens the door for the protagonist, and as Zhang leaves, the salesman, very concerned about his customer, asks him to be careful or he'll step on his foot, until the protagonist hears someone asking if it isn't Zhang Zioyon, and he looks away without saying a word. And the middle-aged guy talks about finding him on the black market. No wonder the protagonist has been spending so much lately, ignoring Zhang Jing, and he comments that it seems the protagonist's family has some heirs or something. And then he asks what the protagonist is doing, and also asks if he has seen too many marketing accounts recently, and has decided to sell everything and live comfortably. At that moment, the protagonist thinks it's time for him to test out his new skill, and then he activates his mind's eye. And then he looks at the salesman and sees that the salesman has good intentions and Qi Jing's current one has bad intentions. And the protagonist thinks that, as expected, it's a very useful skill. And the protagonist answers the middle-aged man, saying yes, lying on the bed, and asks if he had tricked Qi Jing into sleeping with these fakes and second-hand goods. And he thinks it's okay, because she's only second-hand and therefore worth these fakes. And Lai Shuoxing, completely disgusted, asks the protagonist what he said, and the salesman asks the protagonist, calling him boss, if he knows that guy, and the protagonist replies that he knows him like an enemy. And then the arms dealer says he's understood everything and asks the protagonist to go ahead, because he's going to teach Lai Shuoxing a lesson. And the protagonist asks the dealer not to kill him, because he has other plans for him. And suddenly, some men join the vendor, and the middle-aged man asks what they're doing, and he started to get desperate, asking the arms dealer if they couldn't talk, and he takes a beating. He's been trampled on a lot by them, and he thinks the protagonist is a bastard, and he should just wait. Then 2 days later, the protagonist was picking up a load from the truck, and the system panel shows that the arm to the teeth mission has been completed, and the protagonist has earned 10 system points, and the protagonist keeps seeing those weapons, until suddenly, the system panel shows that he has been credited with a bonus reward, the reward being a potion to increase his physique by 2. The protagonist with the potion in hand asks if it's an extra physical enhancement potion, and it's twice as effective as the one in the store. Then he simply prepares to apply that potion to him, and then he applies the potion, and his eyes turn white, and then he gets 2 more for strength, and he tells himself that the average physical strength of a grown man is 5, and now, adding 2 points, that's a moment of 40% in power, and that's it. He decides to open the system panel store, and he buys the physical enhancement potion in one more. He thinks he wanted to maximize that advantage, and in between he applies another potion to him, and he thought that there were now 8 points of physical strength, 60% more power than an ordinary person, and he needed to find a target to test this on. The protagonist was practically on fire, until he looks over and sees some construction beams, and he tells himself that he's found them. So he takes one of these beams, and he quickly kicks the beam, causing it to crumple, and the beam hits the wall with everything, and the protagonist is very happy. He laughs and says that in fact with his current strength, even unarmed, he's not the kind of person others can play with, and even against early stage zombies, he's not afraid at all now, and those weapons shouldn't take up too much space, and it's best to store them in the space ring, just in case. He then activated the ring, making various things go to it, and he thinks that the day after tomorrow is the first day of the apocalypse, and he wonders if there's anything he needs to do. And then he remembers the old man, who inspired him and said that he counted on honesty. His granddaughter needed to transfer schools, and they urgently needed that house for her to live in, and he had been going around that area and only his house was for sale, and he couldn't give up selling it now. And the protagonist tells himself that even after experiencing the apocalypse and human betrayal, it's still hard to completely ignore the plight of others, and it's alright. He's going to send some essential supplies to the apocalypse, and he thinks that if the old man can survive in the long term, it's entirely up to him, and he should consider it retribution for his financial plan for the apocalypse. Then the scene changes to a location. It was daytime, and a black car was arriving. Inside this black car was the protagonist, who gets out of the car and comments that he needed the GPS or no one would have been able to find a place like this. Then he starts up the stairs, saying that it looks like that old man really isn't well off, renting such a cheap apartment on the top floor. He then finds the old man's apartment and starts knocking on the door. He thinks about it. He thinks it's better to take out the supplies that will be delivered first, otherwise it will be difficult to explain later. And then he takes the ring and puts it on his finger. He then activated the ring, making several boxes appear there. Then the old man says he'll be right there, and asks those on the other side of the door to wait just a moment, and the old man barely opens the door and comments on the rent, saying that next Monday he'll be there for sure, until he stops talking and realizes that he wasn't the person who was going to collect the rent, and asks if he isn't Jiang. And around the protagonist there were several boxes, and the old man was worried, asking the protagonist what they were, and the protagonist told the old man that he would explain later, and for now, he just wanted the old man to help him. He was going to take the things inside and not let the neighbors see. Then, after placing the boxes inside the apartment, the best man comments that for young people, they have good stamina moving so many things at once, because the protagonist hadn't even run out of breath. And then the protagonist comments that the room is acceptable, the door is sturdy enough, and he tells the old man that what he needs to tell him, the old man had better see very well. He tells him that as for those supplies, he should use them wisely, and they should last for half a year. And he explains that from tomorrow, in this world, until he stops talking, because something caught his eye, he sees a picture of a portrait, and the old man asks Zhang what had happened, and asks if he can't just keep these supplies in his room. After all, they're moving in a month, and asks if he's not sure about that. The protagonist answers nothing, completely focused on the portrait of the old man with an acquaintance of his. He looks at that portrait, thinks, and at the same time wonders if it's Shanshan. He's wide-eyed and open-mouthed at that moment. Then he asks the old man if his granddaughter is called Meng Shanshan, and the old man asks the protagonist how he knew that, because he doesn't remember mentioning his granddaughter's name to the protagonist. And then he asks the old man where his granddaughter is now, and the old man answers the protagonist, saying that she is studying in their hometown, and as soon as the transfer of the house is completed, they could transfer her school as well, and the paperwork is almost ready. And the protagonist remembers seeing Meng Shanshan, her voice very shaky, saying that it was all her fault and that she had caused problems for her grandfather. And the protagonist thinks that he remembers that in the past life, Shanshan said that her grandfather risked his life to rescue her at school, and although he saved her, he ended up dying there. Her regret in that life, he would make it up to her. And then he tells the old man that he can't move anymore, and the old man goes into shock at that moment, asking if the protagonist is going to change his mind and says that he can't do that. Protagonist asks the old man to let him finish. He explains that from tomorrow, this world will become a human purgatory. Whether it's his granddaughter's home or school status, nothing else will matter. And now, he asks the old man to follow him and go to the school where Shanshan is. He asks him to pick her up and he'll find a new place for him. And the old man, completely desperate, asks the protagonist what he's saying because he doesn't understand a word, and the protagonist thinks that old is old. Many things are not understood, and he wanted to understand how he could explain them to the old man. At this, the protagonist asks the old man if he knows about famines, and the old man replies that he does, and John continues, saying how miserable and terrible the people in the famine era must have been. The old man can imagine, and the old man replies, saying that he can imagine, but he didn't understand how there could be a famine in a peaceful and prosperous world. Even if there was, it shouldn't be. And then the protagonist points to his hand with a ring on it, leaving the old man surprised, and suddenly, everything disappears. And then the old man, completely desperate, asks the protagonist where the things are, and he says that all those things are gone, and he asks Jong what kind of magic that is. The protagonist comments that he has superpowers and he can predict the future, and he wants to live, and he also wants Shanshan to live, and from now on, everything will be done according to his word. Then he asks the old man where Shanshan's school is. Then they take a black car, and the old man seemed really scared at that moment, while the protagonist was driving. Then the protagonist arrives with the old man at the girls' school, and he quickly asks the old man if he knows what class and dorm Shanshan is in, and the old man says that he knows, and the protagonist says that this is good, and they should go soon. And at that moment, a fight was going on, where a long-haired girl slapped Shanshan, calling her a bastard and saying that she just doesn't understand. She asks what's so good about Shanshan, and Zhang Xiaocheng really likes her, and then Shanshan, her face reddened from the slap, says that she had told him, and she didn't want to get involved with him, and it's all one-sided. And another girl gets involved, asking if Shanshan was making excuses, and kicking her, and at that moment, the girl who had slapped Shanshan grabbed her hair, and asked what the girl meant, and also asked if she was saying that her Zhang Xiaocheng was throwing himself at her, on top of which she was despising him, and Shanshan screamed. Suddenly, the old man shouts, asking what those girls are doing, and then one of the girls says it's Shanshan's useless grandfather, and the girl asks her grandfather why he's there. The angry old man asked what they were doing, and told them to let his granddaughter go. Just then, 3 kids arrive, and the blonde-haired kid tells the old man to get out of there, saying that this is young people's business and asks why an old man would be meddling in this. But the old man was very angry at what the boy had said, calling him a brat and asking him if he didn't have any manners, saying that it wasn't right to bully colleagues like that. At this, the boy with a baseball bat in his hand simply calls the old man miserable and prepares to attack him. However, the protagonist quickly grabs the boy's hand, who was about to attack the old man, and the protagonist comments that the boy is so young and is already learning to be a thug, and then the 2 boys didn't understand, wondering where that poor guy had come from, referring to the protagonist, and the other boy asked if he had ever heard that she had a brother, and suddenly, the protagonist kicks the boy with a baseball bat, sending him flying far away, and at that, they are visibly apprehensive, wondering if the protagonist is trained, and the blonde boy thinks they should take the protagonist along, and the protagonist looks at them seriously. At that moment, one boy was behind the protagonist with a baseball bat, and the other was in front of him with a knife in his hand, and when the boy with the baseball bat would attack, the protagonist simply dodges, and at the same time, he thinks that after improving his physical abilities, even his reflexes have become faster. Then he grabs the boy by the collar from behind, and he throws him to the ground with everything, as if he were anything, beating the guy quickly. However, the man with the knife was still standing and approached the protagonist. She quickly dodges and grabs his hand, which was holding a knife. Then he takes the knife and kicks the boy in the leg with all his might, making him fall to the ground like like ripe fruit. At that moment, the protagonist was standing while the other two were on the ground. The girl is completely surprised to see this, and the protagonist approaching her makes her worry, and she asks what he's going to do, and the protagonist doesn't give a damn about that girl, slapping her in the face, and she's completely surprised at that moment, wide-eyed and not saying a word, and then the protagonist pulls the other girl's hair and asks her if she likes hair pulling. The girl starts screaming, asking him to let her go, and suddenly, the protagonist simply puts the knife to the girl's neck, and the girl asks why he has a knife and what he's going to do. Suddenly, the boy cuts himself with the knife, making the girl scream a lot, and he seemed to have a very Machiavellian look on his face, and his eyes glowed blue, and Shanshan and the other girl were horrified at that moment, their eyes wide open. Just then, the girl who was cut kneels on the ground. Speaking of her hair, the protagonist had simply run a knife through her hair, and she calls the protagonist a bastard, asking how he dares to cut her hair, and she wouldn't forgive him for it. She was completely indignant. The protagonist tells the girl that long hair will only get in the way of her life, and she asks what he just said. The protagonist explains that she will understand in a few days and short hair could save her life, and he calls Shanshan, saying that they are leaving, and Shanshan asks the protagonist what he meant by leaving and where they were going. Then the three of them were in the black car, and the girl was asking why she doesn't go to school anymore, and the old man explains to you that there's going to be a big famine soon, and he asks what the point of going to school is, because he thinks survival is the most important thing, and the girl asks what he means by a big famine. At this, Shanshan asks her grandfather how many times she has told him not to believe these things that are called scam, and then the protagonist sees them fighting in the rearview mirror, and the girl asks how much the old man has been tricked this time, and the old man says it's nothing to do with a scam, and he says that what he's saying is in fact real, and the girl continues, saying that every time he's tricked, and he always says it's real, and the protagonist thinks that in this life, he's going to make sure that Shanshan is safe, and the protagonist tells the old man's granddaughter that her grandfather really wasn't fooled this time, because he was the one who told him about the famine, and she's blown away by it, and then Shanshan asks the protagonist who he is, and the protagonist says that his name is Jiang Zioyong. She could call him Brother Yang from now on, and the girl thanks her brother Yang for teaching Sun Y and his gang a lesson, and the protagonist asks her not to worry about these people, as they probably don't have many days left, and the girl asks the protagonist what he means by that, and asks if there really is going to be a famine. The protagonist explains that the famine was just a way for her grandfather to understand, and she says that she understood and asks how there could be a famine in such peaceful times, and the protagonist says that what is really coming is the apocalypse, and the girl goes wide-eyed after the protagonist says this, wondering if he's serious, and the protagonist says that the weather must be right, and he asks her to check her phone and watch the short videos and the news. If nothing unexpected happens, she should be able to see some signs, and he tells her that he's serious, and the girl, smartphone in hand, watches a video talking about sword fights over grudges in the world of martial arts. The movement of the sleeve reflects the moon. Leaves fall with the wind in the west, until suddenly, she slides her finger and arrives at a video that comments that the first time in his life he sees someone angry biting people, and two people were holding that person, and the girl keeps thinking about them, saying it was anger. Then the person recording comments that the snow is coming down again, and she asks if it's just her, or does the mist smell strange, until suddenly, the girl goes wide-eyed, and the person in the video is shocked, asking what's wrong with her. I wonder why she's biting him, and asks if she's become some kind of dog, at which point he comments that he can't hold himself and he's feeling terrible and asks someone to take him to hospital, and the protagonist comments that it's as expected. The signs of the apocalypse have started to appear, and the girl asks them if there really is going to be an apocalypse, and the protagonist answers her, saying that tomorrow is the first day of the apocalypse, and a toxic Neo will cover several provinces, including Province B. As they travel, the protagonist explains that this unknown toxic mist will affect living creatures. Gradually, a significant proportion of people will turn into zombies because of it, and some people won't be spared either. Once he dies, he becomes one of them, and the protagonist says that with a young girl, she must know what zombies are and asks if he's right, and the girl says that she knows, but it's simply unbelievable to her, and the protagonist goes on to say that by tomorrow, the day after after tomorrow or next week. When all this really happens, she won't find it so unbelievable. And suddenly they were stuck in traffic. And the protagonist didn't like it at all, and they realize that even the emergency lane ahead is blocked, and the old man tells the protagonist about the possibility of them getting stuck in traffic, and those zombies he mentioned simply catching up with them. And the protagonist asks the old man not to worry, because it's not that urgent yet. And at the same time, the protagonist thinks that although there are still a few days to go before the zombies completely lose control, he wonders if there might be a small outbreak there. And then a car starts to accelerate, and suddenly he crashes into the protagonist's car, making them shake a lot in the car. And the protagonist wonders what the hell just happened, saying that without signaling, they simply cut into the emergency lane suddenly, and he said he's not going to let the guy who did this get away with it. Then he's side by side with the car that hit him, but the car was trying to get out. The protagonist gets angry, asking if that person won't give up and keep trying to cut it. And then the protagonist shuts him down, and the guy is visibly annoyed with the protagonist. And the worried old man tells Jong that that guy looks rich and powerful, and maybe they should let it go. And the protagonist tells him not to worry about it, because if he uses a kai and starts a fight, he won't mind sending him to heaven sooner. Then they finally got through and must have been stuck for almost an hour. Suddenly, the girl asks her brother Young to be careful, because it's that car from before that tried to cut him off, and the car is next to his, and the protagonist comments that he is a very persistent wretch. And then the protagonist simply crashes his car into the boy, and the old man comments that it's a car chase, sudden braking and typical road rage, and asks Jong not to let it get to his level. The protagonist comments that if he had gone before, he could have tolerated it. But tomorrow is the apocalypse, and there's no need to be lenient with scum like that. And then he hits the boy's car with everything, causing the boy's car to crash into the road wall. And then the boy says that the protagonist is just a bastard. Then he takes out his smartphone and calls the traffic police, asking them to check the surveillance and get the license plate number. And he says he'll make sure the protagonist knows that there are some people he can't mess with. Then it was evening, and the Paragon was arriving with the old man and Shanshan. He shows the old man what he had built, and he is completely surprised and open-mouthed at that moment. And the surprised girl comments that this is a bit much, and the protagonist, being very direct with the two of them, asks them to rest early, because from tomorrow onwards, each day will become much more difficult. Then, after the night had passed, the protagonist had a mug in his hand and was staring at the horizon. And then Shanshan approaches, saying that she hasn't slept so well in a long time, and not having to go to class in the morning is great. The protagonist asks her if she has woken up yet and asks her to go with him to check on their fortress. He tells the girl and the old man that the walls are made of reinforced concrete, and the protagonist explains that the remote-controlled gate is also made of bitchin steel, 3 centimeters thick. Whether it's people or zombies, without heavy weapons, there's no way through there, and he asks them both to remember that without his permission, no one except the 3 of them is allowed to enter the fortress. And the girl asks if there are any survivors who get there, will they just let them die? And the protagonist ignores it, asking the 2 to follow him. And on this, he comments that in the apocalypse, people's hearts are unpredictable, and he also comments that the dark side of human nature will be magnified infinitely. Being overly compassionate will only bring harm to themselves. At that moment, he shows something to the old man and the girl, which leaves them both wide-eyed and open-mouthed. He said that if the survivors came for help while he was away, those container zones could provide temporary shelter for them, and it was a very large place. But he said that under no circumstances should they enter the fortress until he returned and asked if they had understood. And the 2 reply that they have understood, and the protagonist continues, saying that he will take them to the food store next, and he will tell them which areas of food can be distributed sparingly. And then he reaches for the food stock, and he says it last. Then he stares at them both, and then he activates his mind's eye ability, turning his eye blue and setting it on blue fire, and he sees that they both mean well towards him. And the protagonist thinks and wonders at the same time if this is a sign of trust, and this is the first time he's seen it. And he comments to both of them that weapons are the most important thing in the apocalypse. And suddenly he calls up the stock that was stored in the ring, and he says that they should make sure to keep them under their control and never let them fall into the hands of others. And at that, the old man picks up a shotgun, while the girl picks up a crossbow, as if she were Darl from The Walking Dead, and to make matters worse, she has short hair, just like him. And the old man, seeing all this, says that yes, the protagonist is definitely right. And then the system showed the new task, which said that he was supposed to find Meng Xianchen. And the Old Companions series mission was activated. And now there was a new mission, called Old Companions number 1. And the task requirement was to find and rescue the protagonist's old partner, called Zhang Kai. And the reward points were 20. And the protagonist sees that task in the system, and has a tone of doubt at that moment. And at the same time, he thinks this is great, because he was worried about how to find his old comrades. And then he looks at Meng Xianchen and her grandfather, and asks them both to remember everything he had just said, and asks them not to try to break these rules, because they exist so that they can survive this apocalypse. And then he starts walking and Xianchen asks where he is going. The protagonist says he's going to recruit and strengthen their team, and he drives off in his black car. Then the scene simply changes to a visibly tidy location. It was a rather famous karaoke bar, and there was a group of friends singing and having fun. After the singing, the white-haired boy was passing by with the bespectacled boy, and they asked them what they were doing. And the bespectacled boy said they were going to the toilet, and asked them to eat slowly and not choke. And the white-haired boy said he would pack it up for him and take it back. And then he asks if the white-haired guy and the guy with glasses have any urinary hesitation and thinks their kidneys are weak. And they don't like this joke one bit. Then the two of them come out of the bathroom smiling, until the white-haired boy simply bumps into a blonde girl. And then he apologizes to the girl, saying that he really didn't mean it. And then the man who was with the girl gets angry, calling the white-haired boy a brat, and saying that he should watch where he's going, kicking the poor guy, and the white-haired boy just flies off and hits the wall. Just then, the bespectacled boy approaches Zhang Kai and asks if he's alright. And then the bespectacled boy turns around, asking the man what he's doing and why he's hitting him. And then the man asks him what that is, and he says that it's rare that someone dares to answer him, and he gets very angry about it, even cracking his fists. Suddenly, he stopped the bespectacled boy, asking what he was doing, at which point the white-haired boy called the bully his boss, said it was all their fault, and asked him to please not hit the bespectacled boy. And then there was a guy blowing his nose on a rag, and he kept looking at that man's fight with the two boys. One man telling the bespectacled boy that today he was definitely going to teach him a lesson, and the boy with his white cloth, a little annoyed, thinking that he was unlucky, because he had just recovered from a stomach flu, and now he's caught a cold. And seeing that, he wonders if it really is another fight, and he thinks that he can't go a moment without some action over there. And then he approaches the boys who were fighting and asks them to please calm down. And then the man, visibly nervous, asks if the guy was disrespecting him, asks if he knows who he is, and says that even his boss wouldn't dare grab his clothes, when in fact the guy was just trying to break up the fight. At this, the boy gestures with his hand, asking the two boys to get out of there now, and I'm sorry about that. And at that moment, the bully who was with the girl tells the boy to call his boss over there right now, asking him if he's disrespecting him at a time like that, and he thinks that karaoke doesn't want to go on anymore, while the boy asks him to calm down, and the white-haired boy and the boy with glasses run away. And then they enter room 3090, and there was a lot of light in the place, and some people were sitting around singing with microphones in their hands. And then they both sit down, and the boy asks if they've been chased by a dog or something, and also asks why they were in such a hurry. And the bespectacled guy answers what was almost that. He explains that they had accidentally bumped into the thug coming out of the bathroom, and he was drunk and wanted to attack them, and luckily, the waiter was smart enough to calm things down. Otherwise, they would probably have been beaten up. And the boy, hearing that, gets a bit upset, asking why they hadn't come back. And he also asks when their mechanical engineering class has come back. And he says he's going to make a call. He's going to call all their brothers, and they're going to take care of that drunk guy. And the white-haired boy says that he's had enough and asks him to stop showing off. And he says that they'll be graduating in less than a year, so they should stop looking for trouble. He asks them to continue the music and keep dancing. And suddenly, someone kicks open their door. It was that thug, holding the waiter who was beaten up, and he was accompanied by some people. At that moment, the friends of the white-haired boy and the bespectacled boy boy were visibly worried and on alert. And then the thug says that it was them, and next to him, there was a guy with a baseball contact, so he asks them to get them. And after that, they get both the guy with glasses and the guy with white hair to crouch down next to them. And then the waiter was there too, badly bruised and shaking a lot. And then the boy asks if they're going to let them make the call or not. At this, the visibly irritated bully asks if he had said they could talk, and he grabs a bottle of booze, and it smashes into the boy's head, and the white-haired boy was in despair, seeing what that bully had done to his friend Chen Chang. Then suddenly, from outside, the protagonist's car arrives at the scene, and the protagonist comes out and comments that this is the expected university student. He starts to climb the stairs, and he comments that the world is ending and his partner still has a head for singing. Meanwhile, inside, a guy is already on the floor with his head covered in blood. The bully asks his girlfriend, "Are you feeling better now?" But she replies, "No, it wasn't him who bumped into me." The guy then points to the culprit. "It was him, wasn't it?" he said, pointing at Zhang Kai. At that moment, the guy who had been attacked grabs an ashtray and tries to fight back, but the bully's group holds him down. Still furious, he says, "This guy's got a lot of nerve, doesn't he?" Without a second thought, he smashes the remains of a bottle right on the guy's head, knocking him unconscious. Now it's Zhang Kai's turn to charge forward, while the other guy stands trembling in fear. A chaotic fight breaks out, but while the brawl unfolds, the waiter starts to feel strange. He begins transforming into a zombie. Without warning, he bites one of the bullies on the shoulder, who screams for help. The bully's girlfriend has no idea what to do, obviously, while Zhang Kai's friend is panicking. Sprawled on the floor, the group tries to restrain the waiter, but he's incredibly strong. He looks like a rabid dog, biting everyone around him. Suddenly, protagonist appears. With just one hand, he lifts the zombie and hurls him against the glass, shattering it. He commands, "Everyone, stop now." One of the bullies, incredulous, says, "Who is this guy? How did he do that with just one hand?" Meanwhile, the leader of the bullies glares at protagonist and asks, "Who are you?" But protagonist ignores him and turns to Zhang Kai. "Were you bitten?" Zhang Kai replies, "No. Why?" Protagonist simply says, "Follow me." The bully tries to grab Zhang Kai, wanting to settle the fight, but is interrupted by the first guy who was bitten. He starts sweating profusely and says, "My head is spinning." Someone asks, "Is your cold getting worse?" But protagonist is alert. He knew what was happening. The bitten man mumbles, "No, this isn't a cold symptom." Protagonist asks, "You were bitten, weren't you?" "I was. So what?" Protagonist thinks quickly. The bite was on the shoulder, very close to the head. He knew this meant the transformation would happen fast. Without hesitation, protagonist grabs the waiter's now undead body and drags it away. He throws it into a room and locks the door. Then, he comments, "Good thing zombies haven't learned how to open doors." He calmly wipes his hands and walks away as if nothing happened. Protagonist asks, "Zhang, who needs to be dealt with here?" Zhang Kai, confused, replies, "Wait a minute, who are you? Do we know each other?" Meanwhile, the bully, irritated by protagonist's attitude, charges at him, but protagonist grabs his face like it's nothing and slams him to the ground, knocking him unconscious. Another man, who had also been bitten earlier, rushes toward protagonist, but all he gets is a punch to the throat, dropping instantly, foaming at the mouth. The scene leaves everyone in shock. Wait, that guy got punched, and now he's convulsing. What just happened? Someone asks, terrified. Protagonist, unfazed, responds, "Well, if anyone else wants to continue, my fists are ready." Then, he turns to Zhang Kai and orders, "Get your friends and get out of here, now." Later, the group carries the man who was hit by the bottle, while the bullies also begin to leave. However, protagonist blocks their leader at the door. Protagonist glares at the bully and says, "You despicable drunk, you nearly killed your own friend back there and still think you'll get away with it." The bully tries to fight back. "Get out of my way." But protagonist shoves him to the ground like a sack of potatoes, dragging him to the room where the zombie waiter was locked up. He throws the man inside and locks the door. The bully starts yelling and threatening, "Get me out of here. Open this door right now." At that moment, the bitten man fully transforms into a zombie. In a fit of rage, he attacks the others in the room. Outside, protagonist calmly listens to the screams and chaos. A security guard, alarmed, approaches. "Is everything okay? Do you need help?" Protagonist replies, "Lock that door immediately and don't let anyone out." Call the police and the hospital. The hospital? Why? There's a patient with rabid flu in there. The security guard, confused, asks, rabid flu? Protagonist ignores the question and continues. Let's go. Move it. Son, now. The guard obeys, locks the door, and protagonist leaves with the group. Another security guard arrives, asking, what's going on here? It's chaos. The first guard answers, there's a patient in there with rabid flu. The second guard, skeptical, decides to check the security cameras. Upon reviewing the footage, he sees the zombies devouring the people inside and immediately orders the police to be called. Meanwhile, protagonist is already outside. He orders the group, get in the car. This place isn't safe anymore. On the road, Zhang Kai looks at protagonist and says, I don't even know who you are, but you've helped so much. Protagonist, now introducing himself as Zioyang, replies, I was hired to protect you. Zhang, you don't need to know who paid for it. One of the friends in the backseat interrupts. Hey, what's this rabid flu you mentioned? People online say it doesn't even exist. Zioyang glances at the rearview mirror and responds sarcastically. And what did you just see in that room? Was it just an illusion? The friend persists. But is there a cure? Any medicine for this so-called rabid flu? Zioyang shakes his head. No, this disaster isn't going away. It's only going to get worse. This world is already on borrowed time. As the car drives down the road, the distant screams of people being attacked can be heard. Another infected person lunges at a victim. Zioyang continues. For now, it's just a localized outbreak. Most people are still in the incubation period, but it won't take long for it to spiral completely out of control. He turns to the others in the car. If you want to survive, follow my orders. The group responds in unison. All right, you lead. At that moment, a system message appears for Zioyang. Mission, protect Zhang Kai volume 1 inch completed. You earn 20 system points. Zioyang smiles at the notification and thinks to himself, great, I can head to the shop now. He opens the system shop menu and reviews the available options. The items were mostly the same. Apocalypse supply box 2 points. Sugar, oil, and protein box 2 points. Armed deterrence box 2 points. He reflects. The cultivator's box is still here. I'll have to buy it eventually. After some thought, he decides. All these options are useful. Zioyang spends 6 points to purchase all 3 items and continues analyzing the situation. However, a troubling thought crosses his mind. Trust. He recalls his previous life, where Zhang Kai's entire team was killed by zombies. It happened because one of Zhang's friends betrayed him, leaving only Zhang barely alive. Zioyang murmurs to himself, who was the bastard that got everyone killed? Meanwhile, at Qi Jing's house, her lover asks, how are you holding up? She responds, worried. The market supplies still haven't arrived. The world out there is chaotic. I'm scared to go out. The man tries to reassure her. They'll arrive soon. I'll send the supplies as soon as I'm done here. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door, startling Qi Jing. She hangs up the phone and peers through the peephole. It's just her friend. I almost had a heart attack, Qi Jing says, opening the door. Her friend enters, agitated, and says, did you hear? The old man from upstairs was taken this morning. It looks like the police and an ambulance took him together. Qi Jing, surprised, replies, so that's why it was so chaotic this morning. Her friend continues, it's because of this rabid flu outbreak. By the way, has Zhuang delivered your supplies yet? Qi Jing shakes her head. Not yet. The friend laughs and teases. I knew it. No man can be trusted. Then, looking intently at Qi Jing, she suggests, why don't you call Zioyang? I heard he's sitting on a huge stockpile of food. He's going to make a fortune in this pandemic. Qi Jing becomes thoughtful as the sounds of chaos outside grow louder. She asks suspiciously, how do you know that? Her friend smirks, full of ulterior motives. The last time I got kicked out of Zioyang's place, I left one of my guys watching him. I found out that every few days, a truck delivers supplies straight to his abandoned factory. Qi Jing furrows her brow. Could he have known about the pandemic in advance? Her friend wastes no time and suggests, call Zioyang as soon as possible. We need to squeeze as much money out of him as we can. Meanwhile, at Zioyang's base, Zioyang and the group arrive at the base. leaving the newcomers amazed. Zhang Kai looks around in awe. This is like a fortress. Zioyong responds with a smile. Yeah, everyone reacts like that the first time. The residents already living at the base rush to greet him. One of them asks, "You're finally back. Everything okay, boss?" Zioyong calms them with a gesture. "Relax, everyone. Let me introduce the new members." He points to Zhang Kai and his friends. "They'll be part of the base from now on." Shanshan, a woman with a commanding presence, steps forward and says, "If Zioyong chose you, I trust him. Welcome." Zioyong asks Shengbo to show the newcomers around, give them a tour, and explain the rules and regulations. As the group starts the tour, a man named Yuming, standing in the back, raises his voice. "Can we use weapons? We want to help defend the place." Zioyong eyes him suspiciously, but before he can reply, a chubby member of the group interrupts. "Hey, Yuming, calm down. Don't be so eager to get a weapon." Zioyong smiles slightly and says, "Don't worry. In a few days, everyone will receive weapons." Then, looking at the man who had been hit in the head with a bottle, he orders, "His injuries are serious. Take him to the medical room immediately." Everyone obeys. After that, the group takes a bath and relaxes a bit. One of the newcomers comments, "This place is quite comfortable." Yuming, however, murmurs to his friend, displeased, "If you hadn't stopped me from speaking, maybe we'd already have weapons now." His friend tries to calm him down. "Stop complaining. We're being protected here." But Yuming retorts, "Protected? At best, maybe. At worst, this is house arrest." His friend sighs and responds, "Don't talk like that. Zioyong saved us." Irritated, Yuming replies, "Who is this guy? Anyway, why did he save us?" Zhang Kai, who overhears the conversation, comments, "He said he was hired by someone." But Yuming shakes his head, skeptical. "That doesn't convince me. He didn't even say who hired him." Shortly after, they hear that the injured man was taken to the medical room. Passing by, Yuming observes the room and murmurs, "This doesn't look like a medical room. It looks like a prison." Suspicious, he looks at his friend and whispers, "I don't know. Maybe they're planning to harvest his organs in there. We need to act first." The friend is shocked. "Are you crazy? We'd be betraying our savior. Why would he do something like that?" Yuming shrugs. "I'd rather betray than be betrayed." He looks around as if already planning something, and adds, "I want to take control of this fortress. Besides Zioyong, there's just an old man and a little girl here." Yiming looks around, and with a sinister smile says, "So, when Zioyong is gone, we'll capture the two of them." The group is shocked and disgusted by the suggestion, but Yiming quickly adds, "Relax, I'm just joking." Zhang Kai can't take it anymore and exclaims, "For God's sake, the apocalypse has just begun, and you're already thinking about committing crimes." The chubby friend, trying to lighten the mood, responds, "If they wanted to take someone's organs, they would have done it by now, don't you think?" But as they walk away, Yiming thinks to himself, "They're all naive idiots. In chaotic times like this, you need to be ruthless. I'm going to take over this fortress and make those two my lackeys." Later, Sheng and Shanshan meet with Zioyong, who asks how everything is going. Sheng responds, "Everyone is settled in, boss. Sheng was being treated in the medical room. He seems fine now. As you instructed, all the doors and windows are locked tight." Zioyong smiles and thanks them. "Perfect. Great job. Relax. You've worked hard today." Before leaving, he adds, "Oh, by the way, Sheng, keep an eye on Zhang Kai's friends. I have a feeling there's a traitor among them." As he heads to his stock, Zioyong thinks, "I need to buy more items." At that moment, he makes another purchase, acquiring the following: Apocalypse Cultivator, Sugar, Oil, Protein, and Armed Deterrents. He spent 12 points, leaving him with 8 in total. With that, he acquired 50 corn seeds, 200 kilograms of sausage, 100 kilograms of stewed pork with vegetables, 50 boxes of pickled cabbage noodles, 1509 bullets. Zioyong looks at the purchases and thinks, "Okay, it's not as good as I expected, but it's decent. Still, resources like these are invaluable." The next morning, several cars approach the base. The group watches and confirms. Is this really the address? It seems like a group is trying to attack Zioyong's base, led by that bully. He orders, "Attack." break everything down. They try to break down the door, but it's no use, the base personnel say. This door is too secure to be broken down. The leader of the attacking group asks, who uses such a thick door in a normal house? He then orders heavy weapons to be brought, and soon they start throwing Molotov cocktails, setting the base on fire. As the Molotovs are thrown, the base personnel rush to fight the fire, using fire extinguishers and buckets of water. Shanchan watches and says, Zioyong was right all along. The apocalypse has barely begun, and people are already doing this kind of thing. Zioyong says, without wasting any time, let's go. It's time to act. I'll go up the tower and see who's looking for trouble. Sheng says the guy is familiar, and so is the car, commenting that it's the one who caused trouble in traffic with Zioyong and was trying to cut them off on the road. Then one of the thugs spots them up in the tower, and the boss says it's that kid, ordering him to come down or he'll burn his doghouse. Zioyong responds that he has 5 minutes to leave. The people ask, hey, do you know who our boss is? Who do you think you are, kid? At that moment, a mission appears for Zioyong. The mission is called Common Threat. His base is under attack, and he needs to eliminate the threat as quickly as possible. Earning 10 reward points, Sheng asks what they should do, and Zioyong replies that there will be no warnings. These guys are clearly criminals, committing crimes without remorse. He says he's going to shoot to kill because leaving these kinds of people alive in the apocalypse creates a threat to innocent people. Then, Zioyong starts shooting. With the first shot, he takes off one of the thug's arms, causing him to scream. Zioyong comments that he missed the head. He's a bit rusty. The people below realize he's using a rifle, and the boss runs, shouting, shit! He heads back to the car, but Zioyong says he's going to finish this now, killing several criminals. The survivors rush to the car and try to escape, but Sheng observes they're escaping by car. Zioyong replies not to worry, as the rifle is automatic. He starts firing and quickly reloads like a pro. Sheng thinks that Zioyong shoots with such ease and experience, commenting that when he served in the war, he never saw anyone as good as him. After several shots, the criminals are dead and the car is completely destroyed. Zioyong thinks he could turn these bodies into zombies, but then decides to do a training session with the group, including Zhang and Shanshan. Sheng asks if he's going to leave the bodies lying there, and Zioyong says yes, because he has other plans. Meanwhile, in Shuxing's car, he asks if they're getting close. Qi Jing and Zaya respond that yes, it's at the next intersection. But Qi Jing thinks that every time Shuxing is around, Zaya puts on this kind of act. She wonders what Zaya is up to. Shuxing approaches the abandoned factory, which is Zioyong's stronghold, and says, I'll park here. You can get out. Qi Jing calls Zaya, and she asks, wait, am I going too? Qi Jing responds, of course, she's the only one who knows where this place is. She guided the way. Zaya says to just keep going straight because she'll recognize it. Also, her shoes are so tight that they hurt, but Qi Jing pulls her out of the car, desperate, saying, for God's sake. Zaya says her phone is in her bag, which is in the car, and Qi Jing responds, leave it in the car. Meanwhile, Shuxing remains in the car, speaking on the phone, instructing someone to prepare everything. As soon as he starts the car again, the car behind them will follow. This car is full of criminals ready to kill. Zaya asks why her friend dragged her into this, but Qi Jing responds that she's a fake, saying, do you really think Zioyong would fall for your traps? Zaya defends herself, saying it's a big misunderstanding and that she's just trying to hook Zioyong because he knows about her, and Shuxing doesn't. At that moment, the two are shocked by what they see ahead. They spot bodies and stopped cars and ask, was there a shootout here? Zaya says, these people are all dead. Qi Jing responds, judging by the blood, they've been dead for a while. Were they people fighting for supplies too? Zaya says that, if that's the case, Zioyong must have died along with them. But Qi Jing responds, I don't care about Zioyong, I just want the supplies. She suggests contacting Shuxing to handle it, but Zaya insists, no, let's head to the factory gate quickly. At that moment, zombies begin to rise from the bodies. The two approach the factory gate, and Zaya comments, this place is really well sealed. Huh, you can't see anything from the inside. Jing asks, "Do you think Zioyong is alive?" Just then, someone catches their attention. It's Shanshan, armed, who asks how they found this place. Zaya replies that they are Zioyong's friends, and Jing adds that she's his girlfriend. Shanshan then speaks into the radio. "Hey, Zioyong, there are 2 more women out here, and one of them says she's your girlfriend." Jing mutters to herself, she must be his new girlfriend. No wonder he's been acting so strange. Zaya is about to tell her not to show it, saying that if she keeps this attitude, Zioyong will never be convinced. Zaya asks, "Do you think Shuxing can handle him?" Jing responds not to worry, because they brought guns. "If they open the gate, I'll kill Zioyong." Later, Zioyong appears and asks what they're doing there. He then uses his mind's eye, and above their heads, there is clearly a murderous intent. Zaya says that she just came to check on Zioyong, to see if he's alright because she's worried. Zioyong responds, "Worried? Shuxing must be nearby, right? How many people and weapons did you bring?" They're shocked, wondering how he knows this. Zioyong, with a few ideas in mind, begins firing shots in their direction and asks if he's crazy for shooting at them. Zaya, desperate, says, "Oh my god, he has a gun? Don't talk like that." But Jing retorts that he doesn't have the courage to kill her. Zioyong responds, "Shooting to kill would be too easy." Then, they hear strange noises behind them. They ask, "What is that?" "It's people infected with the rage virus." Zaya asks, "Does the rage virus bring the dead back to life?" Zioyong replies that he won't kill them with bullets, he wants them to die at the hands of the zombies. The zombies, out of control, charge toward them, but they manage to run toward Shuxing, desperately calling for his help. "Please, help." Shuxing asks why there are people with the rage virus there and orders his group to leave immediately. He leaves the girls behind. Jing, panicked, says she doesn't want to die like this and throws her bag to trip Zaya. When Zaya falls behind, she becomes the zombie's target and dies right there, with a look of hatred toward Jing, swearing that she will make her suffer. Jing runs in panic, muttering that Zaya deserved it, while Shanshan is horrified by the scene. Zioyong remains calm, and the system announces that the threat mission has been neutralized, granting him 10 more points. A new mission appears, asking him to kill the zombies below, and he will gain another 10 points from the system for doing so. Shanshan asks if the zombies appeared out of nowhere. Zioyong explains that since the apocalypse began, the air is filled with a large amount of this alien infection source. Everyone is infected, even those with low immunity. Even if they're alive, they are at risk of turning into zombies. Shanshan says she understands, and Zioyong tells her to gather everyone, as he's going to hold a meeting in the meeting room with everyone present except Chong, who is still being treated. Zioyong says that for the next 2 days, unless absolutely necessary, everyone must stay inside the base, keeping the windows and doors shut. This will allow the bodies to adapt to the infection, reducing the risk of mutation. Zhang Kai asks, "What about Shang?" Meanwhile, in the infirmary, it seemed that Shang was really starting to transform into something. In the city, my friends, chaos was rampant. Buildings were on fire. People were running through the streets, stealing cars. Meanwhile, at the boss's house, the owner of the market tells his family that they need to go to the warehouse to get the remaining supplies. He orders them to stay home, no matter what happens, and not open the door to anyone except him, until someone knocks on the door, and he tells everyone to be silent. He opens the door with a golf club in hand and asks, "Is it you, Brother Yang?" But when he opens the door, someone kicks him in the chest, knocks him down, and immobilizes him. It was indeed Yang, but he wasn't there for good intentions. The boss asks what Yang is doing, as he had treated him so well all this time. Yang replies, "Treated me well? Please, I was just a doormat." Yang says that without him, the boss wouldn't even have bought his house. The boss questions, "What are you doing?" And Yang answers that yes, while he, the boss, had money to buy several houses. Yang tells him to stop the conversation and give him the keys to the warehouse now, but the boss refuses. Yang asks, already impatient, "Oh, still being stubborn?" He grabs the boss's wife's hair, and the son gets furious, telling him to let go of his mother and biting Yang. Yang slaps the boy's face, and the boss says, "You're a scoundrel. If you want to fight, fight like a man. Stay away from my wife and son." Yang says, if he cooperates, his family will be fine. Now, take us to the warehouse. Later, at the warehouse, Yang sees only a few boxes and asks if that's all that's left. Ji says that he was the one who arranged the big client who bought everything. Yang thinks it's true. Zioyong bought all that. Yang says that if they took all the supplies Zioyong has at his factory, they wouldn't have to worry for the rest of their lives. Ji advises Yang to stay far away from him because, in addition to being prepared, Zioyong is well armed. This guy must have discovered the apocalypse long before it happened. But Yang says the problem now is his. Ji asks how so, and Yang replies that Zioyong must get the supply, or his wife and son will be in danger. It's a fair trade, isn't it? He does what's asked, and his family stays safe. Meanwhile, at Zioyong's base, Shong had indeed turned into a zombie and was locked in the infirmary bed. The people, of course, his friends, are quite upset. Yaiming says they should kill him once and for all. Then, Zioyong looks at him, and Jiang Kai asks, "What are you talking about, man?" But Yaiming responds that he's already dead, there's no way to cure him, and if he breaks free, everyone will be in danger. The other guy says that he's their brother, but always wanted to kill him. Zioyong says that, unfortunately, he's right, there's no chance of recovery for this guy. He then pulls out a knife, hands it to Yaiming, and says, "If you want to kill him so badly, use this knife, finish him off." Yaiming stares at the blade, and Zioyong says, "You've always wanted a weapon, right? Use it, end your friend's suffering." But Jiang Kai firmly grabs the blade and tells Zioyong that he will do it. Even so, Jiang Kai looks nervously at the blade. Zioyong holds Jiang Kai and asks if he's sure he's going to do this, and what would happen if he's lying. What if there's a cure? You'll officially become a murderer. But Jiang Kai says he trusts Zioyong. Zioyong smiles and says, "Well, go ahead then." Then, Jiang Kai approaches Shong, and just as he's about to kill him, Shong grabs his hand, because a message from the system arrives at that moment. Shuxing says that Shong's situation is special and that there's still use for him. The system indicates that a new mutation variant has been discovered. So, he's left alone in the infirmary with Shong. Zioyong says, his name is Sheng Shong, right? And tells him that he has a very important task for him. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a car approaches, crashes into a pole, and is left completely wrecked. It was Yong driving. He thinks, oh, what luck. At least I'm almost there. But then, halfway through, he's attacked by a zombie and bitten. He runs back to his car to grab a golf club to defend himself and starts beating the zombie to death. He says, this place is a dump. He keeps approaching the factory. Later, the group at the base gathers, and everyone is armed with melee weapons this time. Shanshan says that the gear around them, these bindings, are a bit uncomfortable, but Zioyong says that zombies don't have reasoning, so the explosive power of these creatures is much stronger than a normal human's. It's very dangerous, and with their current combat experience, it's very likely they will get hurt, which is why the protective gear is necessary. Once you have more experience, you can take it off. Then, they approach a zombie that is alone. Zioyong tells everyone to wait because they are now within the zombie's perception range. The zombie spots them and charges toward them. Zioyong tells them to remember what he taught them. Then, Zioyong easily dodges the zombie's attack and says to aim for the head, strike fast, and don't overthink it. The fat guy is the first to attack with a large blade. He manages to hit the zombie, but it has little effect. The fat guy strikes and ends up hurting himself. Shuxing says that the hardest part of the zombie is its head, and that the fat guy's move is the perfect example of what not to do. So, the fat guy is attacked and asks for help. But Zioyong says his defense was perfect. Look, everyone, learn from this. Now, it's Jiang Kai's turn. He approaches with a baseball bat and hits the zombie right on the neck. Shuxing tells him to keep going, but one strike should be enough. Then, they smash the zombie. They ask Zioyong how it went. He says they did well, but there was a zombie behind him. Jiang Kai warns him, and just as the zombie is about to bite Zioyong, Zioyong simply grabs its head, stopping it in place. He says, if you forgot what I said, never let your guard down when zombies are around. Meanwhile, approaching the factory, G, the boss, is still there and says there are a lot of zombies roaming around. He wonders if Xiaoyang is dead. He sees a car stopped and thinks that this is Xiaoyang's car. For sure, he wonders if Xiaoyang is hunting zombies. But then, a zombie crawls out from under the car, the zombie of Xia, and grabs G's leg. Of course, he's startled, falls to the ground, and is attacked by her. At that moment, he tries to hold on. But just as he's about to be killed, someone blows her head off. It was Xiaoyang with his rifle. Ji pushes the body off him, covered in blood, and Xiaoyang asks, Ji, what are you doing here? Ji says he can't believe he's still alive to see him. But Xiaoyang notices he's been bitten and points his gun right at his head. But Ji says he has something to warn him about, something to say. Xiaoyang says he can speak, but from a distance. Ji says he already knows he's infected and will soon become one of those damned zombies. But he tells Xiaoyang that the damn Yang took his family hostage and will release them if Xiaoyang gives supplies to them. He says, yes, what Xiaoyang did was terrible, but his wife and son are innocent, and asks Xiaoyang for help. He wants Xiaoyang to stop Yang from doing anything to his family. Xiaoyang thinks that, well, gee, even though he did this for his own benefit, the supplies he gave really helped. He looks at his team and thinks that the fortress still has a lot of capacity, so they can house 1 or 2 people. Then, a new mission appears. Xiaoyang says, now this just became profitable. The mission is to save Ji's wife and son and bring them to the base. The reward is 25 points. And the other mission, killing all the zombies around the fortress, is still ongoing. Xiaoyang tells Ji not to worry, that he will take care of his family. Ji lowers his head to the ground, thanking him, deeply grateful. Then, Ji kneels and tells Xiaoyang to end this quickly. Xiaoyang asks, end what? Ji says he doesn't want to become one of those damned mutants, so he asks Xiaoyang to end his life right there. But Xiaoyang calls Shanshan and asks for a motorcycle from the warehouse. He tells Ji to take the motorcycle and go as far as possible to an isolated place. Ji asks why Xiaoyang is doing this, but Xiaoyang replies that he's doing it in exchange for saving his family. Ji agrees and thanks him. He then takes the motorbike, which is like a small motorized bicycle, and as he transforms into a zombie, he thinks of his family. Meanwhile, at the fortress, they finish killing all the zombies there. They pour gasoline on the pile and burn everything. Shuxing says that, with the current training and strength, each of them can handle 1 zombie in hand-to-hand combat. But when it comes to small groups of zombies, or even a horde, they are definitely not ready yet. So, he asks everyone to follow him now. They reach a large door at the warehouse. Shuxing calls for Sheng to take this. He's handing him the warehouse key and says he's going to the city tonight. Sheng asks if he's going alone, since the city must be in chaos, but Zhang Kai volunteers to go with him, along with their friends. Yiming clearly didn't want to go, but Shuxing says it's unnecessary. They'll be in danger in the city and would only be a burden. Unfortunately, he says he's counting on Sheng to take care of the base. Later, in his car, well armed, Xiaoyang's system shop still has nothing because it hasn't been updated. Xiaoyang says it's taking too long, so for safety, he manually updates it, which costs 2 points. Next time he does this, the manual update will cost 4 points. New items appear. Xiaoyang says he has to be more careful next time, but fortunately, he has enough points for it. He grabs a supply box, labeled Black Technology, and then a blinding light fills the car. He gets the Physical Strength Enhancement Serum plus 5. Xiaoyang says it feels like he took a flashbang to the face. But looking at the serum, he thinks, wow, this is potent, and he immediately uses it. He begins to transform, and his strength increases dramatically. Meanwhile, at Sheng Jie's house, his wife and son are still okay, for now, because at that moment Yang arrives. The wife asks what he's doing, and he says they're going to have some fun now as he starts ripping her clothes. She pleads for help, and the son tries to fight back. Of course, it's useless. Just then, a person approaches and asks what they're doing, so noisy and annoying. He asks what's the problem, and the other person answers, if they try to fight to the death, they'll lose nothing. They'll leave with casualties. After dealing with this, we can rest and do whatever we want. The other person says fine, and they start to walk away, but Yang says he'll return to her, and at that moment, they're locked back inside the apartment. Meanwhile, Xiao is in a calm place with a small zombie walking back and forth, but nothing major. Xiao thinks that he currently has 13 stamina points, double that of a normal person, and his reflexes are much better, so he keeps moving, drifting past all the cars Drift King, and thinks that he feels great. Later, on a street full of zombies, he exits the car and says the city is finished and driving here will attract too much attention, so he decides to go on foot, but he is spotted by two zombies who charge at him, but Zio easily dodges the first one, grabs its arm, and throws it into the other zombie. He then summons a machete from his inventory and quickly slashes both their heads in an X shape. Zio says that these kinds of zombies are like paper to him now. This means having more than double the strength of a normal person, and he thinks his senses have greatly improved. He senses that 80 meters ahead, the passage is blocked until a random mission appears in the system. Meanwhile, at a store, zombies are trying to break in because there are survivors inside. They're telling each other to move heavy things to block the door, and the son asks his father if they're going to die. The father says no, the zombies can't get in. He says that, in the worst case, they'll join his mother. It's a horrible thing to say, and the boy starts crying. The policeman says, "For God's sake, do you think before you speak?" And the father replies, "Think before I speak? Look at our situation. For God's sake." The police officer wonders if they're really going to die there, but suddenly, the zombies begin to be massacred. The group wonders what that sound is, as the zombies are being completely destroyed, leaving blood everywhere. The officer orders Dong and Xiaoshui to move everything outside, but without making noise. Afterward, they leave the store and wonder who killed all the zombies. The boy says it must have been another mutant, for sure, but the father asks what a mutant is. The child replies that it's a stronger version of these zombies that appear in many games. The father jokingly says that's probably why his grades were so bad this year. The officer tells Dong that he lacks emotional intelligence and tells him to shut up and stay alert to avoid being ambushed by zombies. They begin walking back to the base but stop when the officer gives the order. The reason is that, ahead of them, Xiaoyang is analyzing his system. The boy says he's a mutant, for sure, but the officer insists he's a survivor. Xiaoyang turns around and says that mutants aren't that common, it's just a vivid imagination. The officer is happy to see he's indeed a survivor and suggests Xiaoyang join them, since he must be in danger alone. Xiaoyang asks if it's just them, and the officer replies that they went out to gather supplies, but there are still many people at the Honan Garden. Xiaoyang remembers the place and asks if it's near a mansion. Dong confirms that it's near that avenue. Dong asks Xiaoyang to come with them, saying the more people, the better, and highlights that their group has a lot of experience dealing with zombies. Xiaoyang pretends to be weak and says okay, thanking them. They continue walking, and Dong asks if Xiaoyang is looking for someone important. Xiaoyang responds yes, and Dong, with a sad tone, asks if it's a relative or a girlfriend. Xiaoyang replies that, with the end of the world, that person is probably dead, and he needs to be prepared for that. The officer agrees, saying that besides zombies, there are also those damn beasts. Xiaoyang asks, beasts? The officer explains that it's a group of criminals who passed through the area to survive. They kill other survivors and steal everything they have. He mentions that some of his companions have already died at the hands of this group, but as long as they stay vigilant, nothing bad will happen. At that moment, the boy warns that there's a zombie near him. He reacts in time and shoots it in the head, killing it instantly. The officer says he's getting tired of these zombies, but Dong warns that the gunshots attracted more zombies, who are now approaching. The police officer starts to panic a little, but soon sees a bus and orders everyone to run there quickly. Xiaoyang thinks that running recklessly is indeed risky, but a shelter like a bus is perfect for defense. The only disadvantage is that if the bus falls, they won't have an escape route. Xiaoyang analyzes the situation and thinks, from 0 to 10, 7 points for this emergency call from the police officer. He runs toward the bus, with the zombie behind him. When he gets in, the police officer quickly shuts the door. The officer then orders everyone to check the seats to make sure there are no zombies inside the bus. The child warns that the zombies haven't given up. They're all over the bus door. The officer says that sooner or later, they will have to leave. Then, the zombies begin to push and bang against the bus. The officer thinks they won't be able to hold on for much longer, but Xiaoshui, with one hand, shuts and locks the door, impressing the officer with his incredible strength. Xiaoshui then says that he will seal the door, and that way, they can kill the zombies through the windows. The officer agrees, and everyone inside the bus begins breaking the windows. When the zombies attack, they kill them through the windows. Dong is holding on to prevent anyone from falling, and the officer comments that with so many zombies outside, those bullets won't be enough. Xiaoyong grabs the police officer's attention and offers a crossbow. The officer asks where he got it from, and Xiaoyong replies that, by chance, he found one nearby. Now, they begin killing the zombies with both the crossbow and close combat weapons, managing to take down many of them. Eventually, they leave the bus, and the kid exclaims, "Yeah, we're awesome, we did it." But Xiaoyong tells him not to lower his guard. Meanwhile, back at Xiaoyong's base, Shanshan says she hopes he's doing well out there, and Yuming offers to take the watch that night. The chubby guy asks, surprised, "Look at that, you're so excited." Yuming replies, "Mind your own business, kid." The other asks, "Wow, you're acting so weird." Sheng then says that if Yuming is going to watch over the place, everyone can go rest in their rooms, but he warns, be extra careful, okay? Yuming was in the tower and thought it was already pretty late. Everyone must have gone to sleep by now. He didn't want to waste any time and decided to do what he wanted before Xiaoyong came back. Sheng was sleeping with a key right next to him. Yuming quietly entered the room and crept up. When he went to grab the key, Sheng woke up and asked what he was doing. Yuming then punched him, took the key, and ran out. Sheng started shouting, waking everyone up and asking what was happening. He said, "Yuming stole the key, get him," and everyone began running after him while he threw obstacles in their way, making it difficult to pursue him. No one could pass easily until Yuming found a useful room and decided to go that way. He approaches his friend's zombie, but as he does, the zombie reacts. Yuming wonders why one of the bandages broke, as it shouldn't have been that loosely tied. But Yuming says, "This is perfect for the moment." As the others start approaching, Zhang Kai notices what happened and asks, "Did you take Shang out of the infirmary? Do you want everyone to die?" Sheng, irritated, says, "I shouldn't have trusted this kid." Shanshan asks what to do now, as Yuming must be getting close to the warehouse. Sheng responds, "The priority now is to lock the zombie back in the infirmary." He orders everyone to use the method Xiaoyong taught before, and to be cautious, avoiding bites. They slowly approach the zombie, and when they charge at it, Zhang Kai manages to immobilize it. They then manage to restrain it, and Sheng says, "Throw it back into the infirmary." They push the zombie back into its place. Zhang Kai locks the door, and Sheng, analyzing the situation, comments that it was too easy. For some reason, the zombie didn't react much, but he adds, "We wasted too much time. Yuming must have already grabbed a weapon. That damned little monster." At that moment, Yuming appears and asks, "Who are you calling a monster?" He says he just found one weapon, and that there are no others, but insists that the one he has is more than enough. "With this, I'll deal with all of you and take care of this fortress for myself. Now, go back to your rooms." Zhang Kai asks, "Why are you doing this? Xiaoyong saved our lives," but Yuming replies, "That favor must have something behind it. He always seems so powerful and proud. Since he saved our lives, I bet he expects us to become his slaves." Sheng then comments, "Some people are born ungrateful, aren't they? This kid is a wolf in sheep's clothing." Yuming, irritated, tells him to shut up and go back to his room. Meanwhile, Shang's zombie was staring at his friend. It seemed like it had something in its hands, some kind of key. In Rocks and Garden, the group approaches and tells Xiaoyong, "Just go straight ahead and you'll reach that mansion, Neil's mansion. But be careful. This area is full of gaps and alleys. Watch out for zombies." The police officer adds, "When you're done with what you're doing, come back to Rocks and Garden. We're in the community building. And don't forget, use the main gate." Xiaoyong gives a thumbs up and replies, "Got it. Thanks." Song asks, "Are you really going alone? Aren't you afraid of danger?" The officer answers that he doesn't know the situation inside the mansion. "If we run into a horde of monsters, we're all dead." Song comments, "Then Xiaoyong might be in danger." But the police officer says that he has already warned him about everything he could. It's a shame. Maybe he'll manage on his own because he's quite skilled, but at this rate, he could die. Meanwhile, in the building where Yang is, surrounded by a street full of zombies, he comments that Jean still hasn't returned from his task. Another member of the group says, "I don't care if he doesn't come back. I'm going to release some stress, or I won't be able to sleep. The group comments that Jean is probably dead by now. They then suggest tying up his wife to make sure she doesn't try to kill herself. Before they leave, the group decides to have a little fun, but Lin warns, be careful not to kill that woman. At that moment, he looks out the window and notices something strange, wondering, when did those zombies die? They were just walking around a moment ago. Heading down the stairs, he wonders if this is some kind of reinforcement. But before he can react, his neck is slashed instantly, and his head rolls down the stairs. Meanwhile, the group approaches the defenseless woman, telling her that now she has no escape. They pull the boy out and slap her. She screams that they're targeting her, but the boy insists he will fight for his mother. However, he's thrown outside, and the door is locked. He begins to shout, "What are you going to do to my mom?" Suddenly, one of the men falls dead right in front of the boy. He sees Xiaoyang and, scared, thinks he is a monster. Xiaoyang asks, "Ji is your father, right?" The boy is so shocked that he can't respond. Inside, the men threaten the woman and tell her to start screaming, or it will be worse. One of them says, "It's fine, I'll go first." At that moment, the door opens. He comments, "The kid's pretty strong." But right after, his neck is slashed too. Yang asks, "What's going on in there?" But when he and the others turn around, they see the body of the fallen man on the floor. Yang asks again, "What's going on?" before he can react. Xiaoyang grabs his face and throws him far away, making him spit blood. One of the bald men in the group asks, "Who is he?" But Xiaoyang immediately stomps on his face, knocking him down instantly. Meanwhile, Yuming continues ordering everyone to go back to their rooms, threatening, "If you don't obey, I'll shoot." Sheng comments, "Obey, or it'll be worse. This guy has a weapon. There's nothing we can do." Confident, Yuming thinks, "Oh, you think you can do something against me? I'll establish my dominance now." He then threatens, "The old man is going to die first." Zhang Kai shouts, "Stop it!" And Shanshan, desperate, cries, "No, my grandfather, no." But at that moment, everyone hears a loud noise coming from the infirmary door. The doorknob seems to be turning, even though it should have been locked. Suddenly, Xiong comes out. The group realizes there was a key in the door. The zombie opened the door by itself. Xiong is clearly furious with Yuming, while Yuming, pointing the gun at him, exclaims, "A zombie opened a door. What the hell is this?" When Yuming tries to shoot, he realizes the gun is out of ammo. Before he can react, it's too late. Xiong lunges at him and starts devouring him. However, instead of attacking the rest of the group, Xiong grabs Yuming's body and begins dragging it outside. Sheng, shocked, asks, "What's happening?" Zhang Kai observes closely and comments, "There's something really strange here." Then, Xiong opens the infirmary door, takes the key, and throws it to the group. Afterward, he enters the infirmary again and locks himself in. The group stands frozen, speechless, incredulous at what they just witnessed. It was as if Xiong was thinking, showing a trace of mentality. Meanwhile, Xiaoyang had already tied up the surviving criminals. He calls the child, but her mother, concerned, asks, "What do you want my son to do?" Xiaoyang simply tells the boy to approach. The child, brave, responds, "It's okay." Xiaoyang hands the boy a knife and orders, "Kill Yang and his group." The prisoners begin begging for mercy, pleading not to die. The mother tries to intervene, saying, "He's just a child. He can't kill people." Xiaoyang firmly responds, "From now on, everything changes. From now on, he will have to protect you. He needs the courage to kill these bastards." The boy remembers everything the criminals did to his mother. Filled with determination, he charges at them with the knife. In seconds, both of them are dead. The boy's mother, stunned, looks at him in disbelief. The child, still processing what just happened, asks Xiaoyang, "My dad is dead, isn't he?" Xiaoyang answers simply, "Yes." The boy drops the knife and runs to embrace his mother. She, emotional, looks at Xiaoyang and says, "Take my son. Take care of him. I'll do whatever you want." But Xiaoyang replies, "No, he wants to stay with you. He wants to protect you, and that's enough." He then adds, "I promised I would do this." Now, the three of them, armed and ready, head outside together. The boy, seeing the chaos and the zombies scattered around, asks, "What kind of creature did this to so many zombies?" Xiaoyang simply replies, "Me." However, He quickly tells everyone to wait as he hears something in the distance. He turns to the woman and asks, "Do you know where Building 8 is? In the garden?" She answers that she knows the direction. "Why?" she asks. Meanwhile, in Building 8, where the police officers group is located, a new group of criminals is preparing to attack and kill anyone they encounter. The survivors inside Building 8 are in panic. "What do we do? Do we surrender?" one of them asks. The police officer answers firmly, "No. If we surrender, we'll be dead anyway. These people won't show mercy." From below, the leader of the bandits shouts, "You have 10 minutes to cooperate, or you'll all die." One of the women, terrified, suggests, "Maybe it's better to go down and surrender." Another woman, nervous, retorts, "I'm not doing that. I don't want to get involved with them." The police officer, trying to calm them down, says, "Don't worry, we're not giving up. If we hold the corridor, they won't be able to get through." Meanwhile, down below, one of the thugs was watching the situation. "They seem well armed up there." The leader, confident, replied, "And the cop is armed too, but they won't last long. We don't need to force it. Just wait." However, they didn't expect what was about to happen. Zioyong was watching the group, sneaking closer. The boy next to him asked quietly, "Uncle Zio, these guys are bad, aren't they?" Zioyong answered calmly while aiming his gun, "Yes, they are the same kind that did that to your mother." Inside the building, the cop moved closer to the window, carefully trying to get a better view of the situation without being shot. He realized the thugs were well armed, but before he could think of a strategy, he heard gunshots. Everyone inside the building was in shock. However, it was the thugs outside who were being shot. One by one, they were falling. The leader yelled, "Who's there?" The cop, looking out the window, realized it was Zioyong, taking them out with precision. Zioyong, with his rifle in hand, was knocking the criminals down one by one. "Amateurs," he murmured, continuing to move forward. The thieves, desperate, tried to hide and retaliate, but they had no chance against him. The leader shouted, "Who's this lunatic? This is a mess." The place where the leader was hiding began to be riddled with bullets fired by Zioyong, who advanced mercilessly. "Take care of him," the leader ordered one of his henchmen. The henchman tried to fire his pistol, but Zioyong skillfully dodged the bullets and took him down effortlessly. The leader, seeing his desperate situation, yelled, "You're out of ammo, right? Now you're going to die." But before he could do anything, Zioyong was already right in front of him. He dodged the shot, grabbed the leader's arm, and put his own pistol against the leader's throat. In a quick motion, he fired, embedding the bullet in the leader's head. After eliminating the thugs outside, Zioyong entered Building 8. Inside, the remaining criminals were already preparing to ambush him, but in a matter of seconds, Zioyong took them all out with fast, lethal movements, leaving the place in absolute silence. Zioyong looked at the group of survivors and said they could leave now. When everyone realized the situation was under control, one of the children excitedly commented, "Uncle Zio, you're amazing." At that moment, a message from the system appeared in Zioyong's mind. Mission, reinforcement, objective, recruit 5 survivors from Rasang Garden. Reward, 25 points. Zioyong turned to the police officer and asked, "Who are these guys?" The officer explained, "These are the bandits I mentioned earlier. They're from Bikin Condominium in the south of the city." The officer called someone who knew the area well to explain what was going on in the south. One of the survivors began, "The Bikin people are well armed and have a lot of resources. They've taken over the entire southern area of the city, taking hostages and controlling everything. You can't face them without preparation." As he listened, Zioyong thought about his past life. He remembered Shukxing and Qi Jing plotting against him, coming from the southern base. Could it be the same people? He wondered. Zioyong then asked, "Is Bikin the only base in the south originally?" "No," replied the survivor, "but since they were so well armed, they took over everything. There was no way to resist. They're cruel. They kill anyone, except the pretty girls, whom they take for themselves." Now Zioyong was certain it was them. He looked at the officer, who was visibly confused, and said, "Get ready. These aren't the only bandits here. There must be more of them." Zioyong handed the rifle he was carrying to the officer and said, "With this, you'll be able to defend yourself better. The Bikin people won't let this go, but with this rifle, you'll manage." The officer agreed, but one of the survivors opposed. "You can't take on Bikin alone. It's suicide. They'll kill you. The officer agreed. It's too risky. Maybe we should find a new place to hide. But Zioyong replied firmly, don't worry, it's not just for you, it's personal for me too. Before leaving, Zioyong reassured the group, stay here. In a few days, I'll come back with a big vehicle to rescue all of you and take you to the east side of the city. Zioyong spoke to the group. Near the abandoned city, I built a large fortress. I'll take all of you there. In the meantime, take good care of yourselves, okay? The officer replied, you too, take care. Meanwhile, on a street filled with tied up and hanged bodies, there was the Biku Shan condominium. Inside, a meeting was taking place, and as expected, Shuxing was present. One of the men asked, how are the supplies from the entertainment area? Nothing new yet, replied another. Shuxing intervened. I've already sent a group there. They should be back soon. But another man added, there are several high-level affiliates in Inyu's mansion. We can't just take the entertainment center, right? Shuxing agreed. You're right. Kig, I've already sent my people to bring any survivors they find. At that moment, another man, smoking, interrupted. Seriously, Shuxing, you haven't completed a single mission you were given. Shuxing, visibly irritated, replied, don't worry, I'll take care of it perfectly. He left the room and called one of his subordinates, asking, what happened? About the 7 guys we sent. They didn't come back, the subordinate answered. Did you send someone to check? Yes, we have news. They were all killed. Shuxing, perplexed, exclaimed, what do you mean? Weren't there only ordinary civilians at Rosang? How did they fall into their hands? He didn't waste time. Gather everyone. I want all the weapons we have. This time, we won't fail. Meanwhile, Zioyong was returning to his base. Upon hearing the sound of the car, Shanshan ran over and said, you're finally back. A notification appeared for Zioyong. Mission complete. You earned 25 points. Total score, 36 points. Shanshan, seeing his condition, said, you're finally back. Looking at the group, I can tell it was Yiming, right? Zioyong confirmed, yes, it was him. Shanshan asked, did you know from the beginning? Zioyong changed the subject. Zhang, guide the mother and child inside the base. I'll meet them later in the infirmary. Later, when they met, Shanshan returned to the question, did you really know Yiming's intentions? Zioyong replied, I wasn't 100% sure, but I knew one thing. One of Zhang's friends was complete trash. He then handed the weapon to Zhang, and when he checked the ammunition, he realized it was fake. Zioxuai mentioned that Zhang was taken by the zombie PR inside the infirmary, and Zioyong responded that it was Zioxuai who did that, not him. He explained that it wasn't a normal zombie, but a very rare mutant. Earlier, during the moment when they spoke with Shang after his transformation, Zioyong asked, do you understand what I'm saying? Blink 3 times. Shang indeed blinked, and Zioyong said, great. You're going to blink to answer me, okay? He began to explain that these infected individuals have a small chance of turning into mutants, which are zombies with much more intelligence and potential. Additionally, some retain fragments of their memory in the present. Zioyong said that, exceptionally, Shang was a very rare case. There was Shang stepping on Yiming's body. He turned to the door as it opened, and instead of attacking, he waved goodbye to the group. Zioyong told Shang that it was enough, asking him just to finish off Yiming's body. Shang then left, carrying Yiming's body. Zhang stopped and asked, Shang, do you still remember? Shang nodded. The group stood in shock, but suddenly, Shang tried to attack Zhang. Zhang said, even in zombie form? You can't hold my hand, right? Were you trying to grab my balls? Shang walked away, chuckling. Then, the mission with the mutant companion was completed, and Zioyong earned another 10 system points. Currently, he had 3 boxes to open, one of which was a level 2 box costing 50 points. Zioxuai commented, a level 2 box. It's the first time I've seen one, but it's pretty expensive. Zioyong decided to open the other 2 boxes for now. He opened the Lifesaver supply box and the Armed Deception supply box. In the Lifesaver box, he found an interdimensional infection blocker, which could block the chance of infection but couldn't reverse it. He also found a Beretta and a lot of ammunition for it. Zioyong commented, this is really good. And it's only level 1. What will the level 2 box give? A tank? He thought the infection blocker was great and said that to open the level 2 box, he would need to complete the mission to recruit the people from Rosang Garden. Meanwhile, Shang was attacking Yiming's body outside the base. The next morning, Xiaoyang gathered everyone and said that from that day on, everyone would practice target shooting every day. The group began shooting at cans and bottles, and Xiaoyang also asked Sheng to organize the rooms because more survivors would be arriving later. He also called Chong to follow him. Near a bus where several zombies were, Xiaoyang and Chong were present. Even the bus driver had transformed into a zombie. Shang simply removed him, and while Shang was wearing a mask, Xiaoyang handed him a key. Xiaoyang said that he could take the mask off, but he would have to wear it only inside the base, and told him to put it back on when they went to Rosang Garden so as not to scare anyone. Meanwhile, Shuxing wanted his plan to succeed. He gathered all his men with the weapons they had and said that now he would take care of the Rosang Garden. They set out to try and kill everyone there. Later, on the same avenue, the bus Chong was driving ran over everyone. Meanwhile, at the 8 building, where the survivors were, they heard the sound of a car approaching. Could it be Xiaoyang? They asked. The policeman said he would check first. Looking closer, he saw that it was actually Shuxing and his men, who were heavily armed. The policeman said, "Those damn people from Bishui Mountain?" Sun asked. "Oh, they're back. Do they want to learn a lesson?" The group said they were armed too, but the policeman warned them not to be reckless. He had more people, and their weapons were better. At the moment, they needed to set a trap, and the policeman said he would go to the rooftop. Shuxing was getting closer to the building. Everyone aimed their weapons at the window, and the group told them to take cover. As a hail of bullets began to shatter the glass, Shuxing grabbed a megaphone to speak to his men, but one of his thugs was shot in the head by a sniper. They tried to identify where the shots were coming from, but it was actually the policeman on the rooftop who had fired. Shuxing thought this guy only had a pistol, but he was actually using an automatic rifle. The criminals became desperate. One of them said, "We have to retreat." The guy ran, but Shuxing ordered them to wait for the signal. However, the man fell dead as well. Shuxing yelled that they were all useless, but at his signal, they had to run. He then ordered everyone to run, and when the men died, he took the opportunity to escape, saying that the policeman was probably out of ammo, and indeed, at that moment, the policeman was reloading. Shuxing jumped into the car and ordered it to leave, but the policeman was left behind. Shuxing didn't care, as he already knew that the policeman was also dead. Meanwhile, on the bus, Xiaoyang took the lead and was running over everything in front of him until he noticed a car at the intersection. He said it didn't matter, and for now, they would head to the building. Then, back at the crime scene, Xiaoyang realized that the rifle had been very helpful. It seemed like they had taken care of these idiots. Shang appeared to be growling, and Xiaoyang asked if he was hungry. "It's fine. You can eat these guys. It's cool," he said. Shang went off with a smile, and while Xiaoyang headed for the building, he began to devour the bodies. It seemed that Shang felt something different while doing this. Xiaoyang realizes that the policeman has killed many people. Meanwhile, the group notices that Xiaoyang is approaching and calls out, "Here, here!" When he arrives, he asks the policeman what happened. The policeman responds that he's fine, thanks to the rifle he gave him, and that the rest of the group ran off. Then, they hear a growl. It was Shang approaching. The group is ready to attack, but Xiaoyang says, "No, he's one of them." The policeman asks, "One of them?" Xiaoyang responds, "There are more bodies here. You can eat." Shang, the policeman, asks if he can talk to zombies, but Xiaoyang says he's not a regular zombie, and he'll explain on the way. "Just get on the bus already," he orders. Xiaoyang tells Shang to eat quickly. After eating, Shang puts on his mask, and the group is impressed. He's smart enough to put on a mask. Xiaoyang tells them to be careful with their words, saying that if they call Shang stupid, he might punch them. Then, Shang gets on the bus and even tries to sit sideways. The policeman asks, "Wait, did the bus tilt when he got on?" Xiaoyang responds, "Key." Xiaoyang then asks if Shang can talk now. Shang simply replies, "Talk." Xiaoyang thinks that Shang ate 6 bodies, which is why he evolved. It seems they'll have to keep working to make Shang stronger, and they can't let him be just an ordinary zombie. When Shuxing returns to the Big Shan, it's clear that he gets an earful. He tells Chief Lin that it wasn't his fault because the enemies had an automatic rifle. Chief Lin asks what kind of small-town policeman has an automatic rifle and calls him stupid. Shuxing admits it's true, and if they don't believe him, they can check. Kaiji then kicks Shuxing in the face, and he doesn't react. He can't do anything. When Shuxing leaves, Kaiji says that's enough and it's time to get rid of Shuxing. But Kaiji adds that he only wants Shuxing's woman, and Chief Lin agrees, saying that it's about sharing, right? Chief Lin tells Kaiji not to rush and to wait for a better opportunity. Later, Shuxing hears all this from behind the door and storms out, breaking everything in his path. Very angry, Qiujing asks what happened and tells him to calm down, but Shuxing says to get everything ready because they're leaving. Qiujing asks where they're going, and Shuxing answers that they'll go somewhere safer than this anywhere. Then, one of his subordinates appears, and Shuxing tells him to gather everyone. Midnight, we're leaving. Qiujing thinks this is very strange. Meanwhile, the people from Rosang Garden were arriving, and everyone was impressed with the fortress. Xiaoyang then completed the mission, bringing 8 people when the mission only required 5. He went above what was requested, earning 5 additional points. Xiaoyang asks if this gives bonus points. This is great, he says. As he gets off the bus, he tells Shang that tomorrow night they'll head south of the city because he has some unresolved matters in that area. Xiaoyang was looking at the shop and realized it was his first level 2 box, telling himself not to disappoint it since it cost 50 points. He then received a physical enhancement serum plus 20, and Xiaoyang commented, "Oh my god, another 20, but when he applied the serum, he screamed in pain. However, he thought to himself that now his physical status was 33 points in total, 6 times greater than a normal human. At that moment, a little mosquito appeared beside him, which he easily caught. Along with strength, he noticed he also had a lot of agility. He let the mosquito go alive. Later, the group was practicing shooting, and the policeman asked if he was heading south now. Xiaoyang answered yes, and the policeman asked if he needed anything. Xiaoyang replied that at that moment, he was the best shooter in the base and wanted the policeman to teach the others. The policeman responded that it was his specialty and that he could handle it. Xiaoyang called Shang and said they were leaving now. When the bus left, we later saw Shuxing making his escape. However, before he could be caught, he was spotted by the people from the condominium in the car. The one who ratted him out was his own girlfriend, Qiujing. The group asked what was going on, and the guy from the condominium asked where he thought he was going. Shuxing responded, "Dongchu, is that you?" The other person replied, "Ah, boss, Dongchu, and we were just taking a little trip. You know, we were going to handle the problem over at Rosang Garden." He then asked about Rosang Garden, and they grabbed one of Shuxing's henchmen and threw the dead body on the ground. The other person called his name, but Shuxing punched him and said, "You think you know this guy? Of course not. I don't know this guy here." At that moment, they aimed their weapons and fired, but Shuxing survived. All his companions died. Dongchu commented that Shuxing had a big mouth. When Shuxing realized what was happening, it was Qiujing in the car, now accompanied by Kaiji. Kaiji said that Qiujing had told them everything about his plan. Shuxing asks how she dares to betray him. That damn woman. And Kaiji asks Lin what to do now. Lin simply signals to have him killed. A little later, Shuxing is being hanged and left for display right in front of the condominium. Meanwhile, the bus had stopped, and Xiaoyang and Shang were approaching. Xiaoyang tells the driver to stop and sees Shuxing hanging, dying. He says Shuxing deserves that, but that he will be the one to kill him. Xiaoyang throws a small stone that cuts the rope, making Shuxing fall face first to the ground. However, it turns out Shuxing wasn't alive. He was in zombie form. Xiaoyang remarks that Shuxing had a tragic end and that he will help him with his revenge. Inside the room, the lady was in a compromised position, dressed in an outfit that would have been highly censored at that moment. While Kaiji was getting dressed, he noticed something strange outside and realized that Shuxing's body had disappeared. At that moment, someone began pounding on the door, trying to break it down. Xiaoyang appeared with his knife right behind Kaiji and without mercy, slashed his throat. Kaiji fell face first to the ground, dead. Lin asked who this person was, and it was clear that Qiujing knew very well who he was. Xiaoyang then threw his knife, killing Lin on the spot. Qi Jing asked why he was there and what he wanted. Zioyong responded that she had been having fun with these guys, hadn't she? He just wanted to know what Shuxing would do if he saw such a scene. Qi Jing asked if it was Shuxing, and he appeared in his zombie form, charging at her and starting to eat her alive. She begged Zioyong for forgiveness, but he let her die and simply closed the door. Outside, Zioyong said that Shang could eat anyone he wanted there. Shang replied that he would eat at least one. Then, Zioyong sensed something strange, using his super hearing, and it seemed like there were people in trouble. These were apparently the condominium workers, and a man with a knife, Lin's assistant, commented that the child's meat was quite tender, but the boss said no, that the child was too skinny, and told them to grab the chubby one instead. He pulled the child from the mother and slapped him, making him fall. The mother begged for mercy, asking them to spare her son and pleading for someone to save the child. However, they then heard several strange noises and asked who was there. The boss said it sounded like a shotgun. "Does anyone here have one?" The henchman replied no. The boy returns to his mother, and someone opens the door. The boss orders someone to check, and when the thug passes through the door, Shang grabs him and starts devouring him. Everyone begins shooting at the door, trying to kill Shang, but it doesn't work. Shang breaks the back window, grabs the boss's head, and snaps his neck. With his mutant speed, he starts killing everyone there, except for the victims. The group wonders why this zombie isn't killing them, and Zioyong appears, saying, "Great job, Shang, you're really fast. No need to take off the mask." Shang responds that the mask makes him irritated, and the group is completely shocked because the zombie spoke. Obviously, everyone is terrified of Shang, even though he didn't kill anyone. However, Shuxing reassures them, saying he won't attack. The child then says that the monster killed everyone in the blink of an eye. Zioyong asks, "What do you mean? Super monster? Have you seen something like this before?" The mother replies that yes, it was in the east of the city, near a market. Zioyong thinks for a moment and says, "So soon? I thought it would take a month or two for another mutant like this to appear." Shang asks what he's talking about, and Zioyong explains, intelligent zombie mutants. The level of rationality and memory varies from zombie to zombie, but they have much stronger hunting instincts and power. Some mutations are much more dangerous than others. Shang asks, "What about me?" Zioyong tells him not to worry, that he's a very rare type, and with him by his side, everything will be fine. He won't go crazy and won't kill anyone. Zioyong then asks if these are all the survivors, and the other person responds that no, there are people locked in the boss's room, and probably some in the basement too. So, they go down to investigate the basement. When they arrive, they are shocked by the scene. Apparently, they captured survivors and killed them. Zioyong comments that this is why there wasn't another camp in the south. The zombies killed everything, managed to eat so much meat. One of the men comments that the people here regularly move the meat elsewhere, and they don't even know how many zombies are around. Zioyong thinks that, for sure, it's a lot. Since they managed to eat so much, he wonders if they're feeding the zombies on purpose. Zioyong then asks about the sales office he had mentioned earlier. The other person responds that the sales office is in the south, about 1 kilometer from there. They capture people, and those who refuse are sent to be killed by the zombies. At that moment, a system message appears for the protagonist. He needs to expand his community as much as possible. He can gain up to 20 points in total. Meanwhile, at the sales office, one of the people comments that they heard gunshots from the back, but another responds that they don't know. Maybe they're using the people for practice. But then, Shang appears and kills everyone in the blink of an eye. The people who were still alive were young girls. They hear more gunshots and people dying, becoming very scared. When someone opens the door, one of the girls panics, but it's just Zioyong. He says, "You can leave. Go, go, go." Then, everyone forms a line to exit, and one of the girls asks if he will really take them to a safe base. Zioyong confirms that he will, but everyone will have to work. The girls respond that they're fine, and that everyone there works well. Zioyong then says, "Then, to save time, let's go." Everyone boards the bus, and they head toward the base. Once they arrive, Zhang and Shanshan are impressed by the number of people. They will go down to greet everyone, and Zioyong says this is his fortress, but he can't let everyone in right away. The group then asks where they will stay for now, and the protagonist says there are cabins, some establishments, and shelters outside with metal fences around them. The conditions are actually very good, so over time, they will improve their living conditions based on their work. The group agrees and starts thanking Zioyeon. Meanwhile, passing by the southern condominium, there was a truck with a woman sitting on it, asking why the person wasn't responding. That damn person. She says that something feels off. As she enters, she realizes that everyone from Bikin is already dead, with only zombies remaining. Of course, they charge at her as soon as she steps inside, but she easily takes down Shuxing's zombie and kills the other two with her knife. Her subordinate tells her that Kaiji is dead, and she responds that there's no helping it. They'll have to deal with the zombies here. She also says that she's going to hunt down the one who did this and kill them. Hello, everyone. We are looking for new members and subscribers for our community dedicated to manhwas and manhuas. If you love these exciting stories and the amazing illustrations of both Korean manhwas and Chinese manhuas, come join our group. Here, you can share your opinions, discover new titles, and interact with other passionate fans. Subscribe and join us on this journey through the worlds of manhwas and manhuas. 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 Manhwas and manhuas.